Well, good evening to all of you joining us here at the Marcia Weeks show. A real joy to have every single one of you with us this Friday evening, the very first day of December. I know for some of us, we've already begun to celebrate the Christmas season with the Christmas songs and carols. I've already begun to hear them from the radio stations and that type of thing. But December kind of begins that season, that atmosphere, that feeling we get in the air that's so special about this time of the year, Christmas. And certainly a real joy to have you here December 1st, Friday, to another Marcia Week show. Now, I see there are 40 of you on so far. We have a really great lineup tonight, tremendous group of participants and presenters that we'll be bringing on in just a few minutes. We don't want anyone to really miss them. So we're going to ask you to share, 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 I think is the way that Marcia normally puts it. And just let me say what an honor it is for me to be able to host this show on her behalf and to be able to be with you, the loyal, patriotic opposition. Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome, Carol and Heath. God bless you. ADG, good to have you too. And Sir Alfred Benjamin out of Brooklyn, New York. Sir, wonderful. Welcome. Just would be great to hear what countries you are from if you're not from Barbados and you're joining the Marcia Week show tonight. It would be wonderful to hear what country you're joining us from. So just drop that in the in the comments area. Of course, if there are any questions you have um, here in YouTube and here, I guess we'll get all of them here on this area. Just drop your questions in as we go through the night. We'd love to be able to answer your questions as it pertains to what we're sharing with you tonight. Good morning. Hear me. Good morning. Good night, Marlene. Great to have you. Eileen Worrell McPherson out of London. Wow. Wow, welcome from all across the Atlantic Ocean. Good night to you too. Wonderful to have you with us this evening. So we're looking forward to a great, great night. We have a lot to share with you tonight. We're going to be taking a look at the Samoa agreement and the implications of that agreement. Um, and we're going to be looking to see what we can do or what is required of us to do where that Samoa agreement is concerned. So a real joy to have you with us to look at that. We also hopefully will be taking a look at the ID card again. We're going to be engaging a number of areas to do with that and to do with the economy and some of the implications of that. We're going to be looking at a statement that was made over the last couple of days regarding Barbados's positioning in the world economic environment. We hopefully will have Mr. SCHAPER on with us again tonight, looking at the aspect of mass resistance in Barbados. Also, of course, we will be having KEMAR on and the general. We expect the general to be joining us tonight as well. He hasn't been well, but we're certainly looking forward to him joining with us tonight. So keep sharing. We're up to 101. We want to get it right up quickly, really quickly. We are at 3 minutes after 7. So we want to be able to get up in a couple of hundred, 300 within the next couple of minutes. So just keep sharing that we can get on this show in a very short period of time, bringing in our guests to discuss these areas of concern to the people. And, I find it very disingenuous that when persons are expressing concern with regards to things in their country and the direction that their leadership may be heading in, and they're expressing those aspects of concerns for transparency and accountability, that we are considered to be troublesome. That's the nice way of putting it. I heard somebody say that we were almost bordering on being treasonous or something like that. And that was so unfortunate in my mind in terms of a statement, So please, let's get it up. 107. We're up to 107. Um, yes, Tony, great to have you with us tonight. Ocean Stalker, Tracy, great to have you. Mark, great to have you with us. Just share, 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 and we'll be on the road in just a couple of minutes. Just a couple of minutes, huh? It's 5 minutes after 7. We want to be able to get going quickly because there's a lot to be shared in the session tonight. A lot of things that we are looking into in this evening's session. Okay, so please get it out there. We're up to 118. We want to make sure that what we're going to be engaging right off the start is available to the maximum number of persons, that you can begin to understand a lot of what is ahead of us as a region. Of course, we're keeping our eyes on the situation with Guyana and Venezuela. I learned this evening that the International Court of Justice has asked for there to be a pause, so to speak, on any matters to do with the Essequibo area in Guyana. It is before the International Court of Justice. I probably can get the links and drop it in here for you that you can view it at your convenience. But if you go onto the YouTube, you will see it there, that you certainly will be able to follow in terms of what's happening there in Guyana. They're right next door to us, not very far away, part of our CARICOM community. We are concerned about what's happening there, and so we want to keep an eye on the matters in Guyana. All right, so just keep sharing. We're up to 128. If we can hit 150 in the next 2 minutes, I'm going to be bringing in our first guests that we can engage this very important discussion and dialogue with regards to this agreement, this new partnership agreement, which will bind CARICOM countries, African countries, and countries in the CARICOM region, 79 OACPS countries. That's, I believe, the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States. 27 members of the EU and EU Commission will bind the interested persons to a 20-year-long political and legally binding agreement. So we want to be able to understand what the implications will be for the Caribbean, not just for Barbados, for the Caribbean, pertaining to those persons who would have signed on. You will recall on Wednesday, we began to look at this, and I shared with you concerning the ministerial statement by the Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Namibia, and we looked at that. And so we also took a look at the comments that were being made by one of our members of Parliament, who suggested that religious and political leaders have been trying to create hysteria in Barbados concerning the signing on of this Samoa agreement. And we will talk about that with our guests in just a moment. We are at 153. So here we go. All right, 153. Make sure you share, please, and get as many people as you can into this environment that they can hear the facts and the truth with regards to this agreement. All right, so please get it going, get it out there, and let's share it together. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome two wonderful and fine ladies. I tell you, I don't know if I can find the words to describe one of them in particular, who I know quite well, and one I'm meeting for the first time tonight. So I'm going to welcome you first, Maxine McCLEAN.
Hi, good evening to you and everybody who is watching the program.
And you're good, loud, clean, and clear, crystal brilliant. That's one
Thank
of the
you.
best I've heard you. So good to have you. I tell you, Maxine, you have not. I'm glad I'm on as host tonight with you on. You have not changed one iota. You look the same way as I remember you. I'm almost tempted to go back to say when I was a teenager, but I am not going
Well,
to go there. Okay.
I will take that. I will take that. Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful to have you on the show tonight. We're looking forward to a really, really great educational process with regards to this Samoa agreement. And let me take this opportunity as well to welcome Sarah Flood BEAUBRUN. I hope I have the name pronounced correctly in terms of the last name. And this wonderful lady, she is from St. Lucia. She's a qualified barrister at law, became a barrister at law in 1995. She was called to the Bar of England and Wales and to the bar of the OECS Supreme Court in 1995. She's a member of the Honorable Society of Lincoln's Inn, and she has held positions of elected member of parliament 1997 to 2004, Minister for Health and Human Services 1997 to 2001, Minister for Home Affairs and Gender Relations 2001 2004. She was Speaker of the House of Assembly 2006 to 2008, Deputy Permanent Representative of St. Lucia to the United Nations 2008 to 2011, and Member of Parliament for the Castries Central and Minister for External Affairs 2016 2021. She's married and has two children. Now, all of that information, Sarah Marcia sent to me today. And once I get that information, I'm obliged to share it because then I might get fired. I don't want to get fired from being the host. But it's a particular joy to welcome you to the Marcia Week show tonight. And we're looking forward to a wonderful time together with both of you wonderful ladies. I would let you know, Sarah, that my wife is St. Lucian.
Wow.
Yes, she is St. Lucian. She is a Gajadar from Forestier. And we were just there in July celebrating our 41st wedding anniversary. We came down. I wanted to go to St. Lucia, her homeland, for the anniversary. She's been in Barbados, I think, since about 5 or 6 years old. She is watching the show tonight, too. So I have to be on my best behavior. I have to be on my best behavior. She is my greatest supporter, but equally my greatest critic. And I enjoy both of them, both of those aspects of her absolutely, because she keeps me on my toes, P's and Q's. So we want to welcome both of you wonderful ladies tonight. We want to take a look at this agreement that I understand. I believe Barbados has signed it. Is that correct, Maxine? Have they actually
Yes,
signed it?
they have signed the Samoa agreement. Yes.
Right. And what about St. Lucia, Sarah? Have they signed it there as well?
We have not signed yet, as far as
You have not signed this yet. Okay. Well, of course, there's a lot that has happened in terms of expressions to do with this. We heard the Trinidadian Archbishop addressing some concerns. There were some rather derogatory aspects. I considered it to be with regards to some comments made by a media outlet called Searchlight in St. Vincent, which again talked about this hysteria. Why are we, so hysterical about this and all of this public uproar? As a matter of fact, they even went as far as suggesting that we were acting in a bigoted and homophobic manner. Just because we are asking questions concerning expressions in the glossary less is, I don't know if that word exists, but I'm known to create words in a document of this nature, which does not have a glossary to explain the meaning of the words in the document. So we want to explore all of these aspects. We also had, I believe, the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Barbados again trying to play down the concerns that would have been Mr. Simmons trying to play down our concerns with regards to it. But I believe that in the environment that we are in globally, with the whole aspect of the gender fluidities that are being enforced and imposed upon different countries, that it is need for us to discuss it. So allow me to give way to you ladies and give us the implications. What is it about this Samoa agreement? What is it really all about? What is the Samoa agreement really? What is the crux of this Samoa agreement?
Do you want me to go first? And let me say hi
Yeah,
to
yeah,
Sarah. It's good to see you, and welcome to the program. I think Dr. Nichols, perhaps it makes some sense to put it into some kind of context, because
Absolutely.
I find that we've had reactions coming from officials who have not sought to enlighten people. And that, to my
Mhm.
mind, is part of an issue, because I heard, and I'm not going to belabor this point, I heard Minister Simmons in his usual aggressive, negative style when people ask him questions and put him under pressure, behaving in ways that were typical rather than spend the time educating. Now, of course, it's an agreement between country. They're actually now, in terms of the Samoa agreement, at this point in time, 27 European Union country states, 79 African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. Of those 79, 15 are from the Caribbean region. It's CARICOM plus the Dominican Republic, which makes it CARIFORUM, as they call it, and then of the Pacific Island. Now, this is an agreement that touches the lives of about 2 billion people. And those 2 billion people represent about 50% of the membership of the United Nations. So we're talking about half, I would call it half the world's population in relation to the membership in the United Nations, in that sense. Or, so and in addition to that, you're talking about a relationship, an agreement, or a series of agreements, because this is not the first one, between European countries, former colonizers, whether it's well, England, the UK has no longer is no longer part of the EU, but it would have been British, French, Spanish, etc., Dutch colonies, etc. So it is a relationship between them. And as you would know, in terms of the history, the colonial relationship was highly exploitative. It was one in which these countries left most of the former colonies, or those countries that remain in not a post-colonial relationship, but not an independent relationship, underdeveloped. And if
Mhm.
you recall, Walter Rodney wrote a book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. In recognition of that, I suppose, and in an effort to maintain some relationship, because of course these countries continue to supply the European countries with a whole range of raw materials, etc. They signed a series of agreements, and going back to 1967, we had an agreement signed in Lome. That was the capital of Togo. That's where the agreements get the name from places they're signed. And essentially what that agreement was, it was one in which the Europeans said, look, we have to assist in developing, and they provided funding for projects for the most part. I'm trying to simplify this because it's pretty
Yeah.
complex. So they financed projects which were supposed to assist development. So let's say, for example, they might have helped construct hospitals, infrastructure, might have done some, and a bit of it was about investment and so on. And that was for 20 years. Obviously, what obtained at that point in time would have been preferential trading arrangements and so on. But as the global system of the World Trade Organization and so on developed, they were challenging some of these things. Now, fast forward to 2000, the series of treaties, as they were called, it was Lome 1, 2, 3, etc. Those were replaced in 2000 by the Cotonou Agreement, Cotonou being the capital of Benin. And what they did was to focus on efforts to move beyond just projects, but to contribute to what I would say would have been the development of, investment and so on, some effort on private sector. So what you're seeing is a growing kind of relationship in terms of what these agreements sought to do. And if you come now to what's happening, and I can go back and explain later, but I don't want to spend too much time. So in essence, what they were focusing on was sustainable development, as I said back then. But now you have an agreement, which is the Samoa Agreement, which now replaces the Cotonou Agreement was supposed to have ended in 2020. And it was extended a bit until this one came into place. But I'm going to read from a document I have here. And it talks about the Samoa Agreement, a new foundation for partnership. Okay. And it says, with a new agreement, the European Union, its member states, and the members of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific states will address emerging needs and global challenges such as climate change, ocean governance, migration, health, peace, and security. But when you go down in this, you would also see something mentioned human rights. And the question is, when we start to talk about these categories, what exactly do they mean? And how do they plan to, one, because there are two things to this. These pillars, they call them the common principles that cover the agreement. Human rights, democracy, and governance, because I'm reading now the new partnership agreement, which is the Samoa agreement, lays down common principles and covers the following priority areas: human rights, democracy and governance, peace and security, human and social development, inclusive, sustainable economic growth and development, environmental sustainability and climate change, migration and mobility. So what you see now is that you've moved from what I would call the third generation of these agreements to have a very comprehensive agreement touching on a whole set of issues. Now, in terms of these, not only are you providing support for those things, but these pillars, the implementation of policies, programs, etc., which fall under these, will, one, be supported by or will influence whether countries get support. So it is not simply, it's not good enough to simply say, look, they're going to support climate change, they're going to support, democracy and good governance, they're going to support migration, they're going to support sustainable economic growth. But the question we have to ask ourselves, how do we define, and you mentioned something about like a glossary of terms, how do we define each of these? How do we explain these? And so I think what I will stop there and let Sarah have hear what she has to say. But just to repeat the point I'm making, the Samoa Agreement is part of a continuation of developmental and arrangements, between the EU and countries of the ACP, between former colonizers and former colonies, intended initially to assist development, but now we are talking about agreements that are very comprehensive in nature and which speak to having a kind of impact on the lives of people. Positive, hopefully, but I will say this, the old people used to say nothing for nothing and very little for something. And what we need to understand is what exactly are we getting? What are they demanding of us in exchange? And how does that impact our daily lives? And I'm not getting hysterical. We both, my colleague who you will hear from in a second, we sat in the positions where these negotiations would have taken place. I can tell you that in the context of the Samoa Agreement negotiations for this started probably around mid 2018. So I knew that when I left the position of foreign minister, these negotiations were on the horizon. And in fact, there were other things, because one of the considerations before I left was what relationship should we, as members of the members of the ACP, develop of ourselves and with ourselves outside of any arrangement with the EU as well. But I would want to hear what her thoughts, what Sarah's thoughts are, and I can come back later to explain, to look into some of these in some detail.
Absolutely, Sarah. We want to welcome you again. I will be interjecting from time to time with one or two ads. I'm almost tempted to say the sponsors, but they're not really the sponsors. There's some ads for the upcoming symposium that is scheduled for next weekend. So I may just put up a flyer while you're speaking, just so that we can advertise it, but it won't interrupt what you are sharing with us. All right, we want to take this opportunity to, I'm just going to bring everybody in one time, if that's okay, and add Mr. Caswell Franklin to our forum this evening. I'm getting some feedback from you, Sir Caswell. As soon as I bring you in, I can hear myself. As they would say on brass tacks, please turn off your radio.
Still hearing it now?
No, and I'm hearing you good and loud and clear. Let me welcome you,
Good.
Caswell, to the show tonight. We have a very special guest joining us, Miss Sarah Flood BEAUBRUN. And of course, you have your familiar colleague and friend Maxine in the show. So we welcome you this evening as you join the Marcia Week show, sir. Welcome.
What your special guest might not know is that I was one of her greatest admirers for a long time. When she was it was speaker in St. Lucia, and she held her own. I remember those days. I really admired you for standing up back then. Never have met you, but I always wanted to go to St. Lucia. I always wanted to at least to meet you. But I'm meeting you here, and good night. Pleasure to see you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Nichols, and hello, Maxine, and thank you for your very kind words. I can't quite remember the name.
Caswell.
I must say I've received a very warm Barbados welcome, and a special good evening, of course, to your wife, who's St. Lucia, and to all of the viewers.
Yes, she is.
Thank you for having me. It certainly is my pleasure. I want
They're both married to St. Lucians.
What? Caswell's wife is St. Lucian as well?
Oh yeah, she is.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that. Wow.
She's from Balaton.
Oh, wonderful. Amazing. Maxine, it seems you are the odd one out.
Yes.
Yes.
I am simply not going there.
Yes. I would like to thank Maxine for making my introduction quite easy, or easier rather than it would have been, because she has set a framework and outlined context with the Samoa Agreement. What I would just like to add to what Maxine has said is, or to emphasize, she has mentioned it, just to emphasize, it's the universal outlook of the Samoa Agreement when compared to Cotonou, where we're looking not just at an agreement that's primarily focused on development of the ACP countries, but it's looking more about achieving the 2030 UN agenda worldwide. So we no longer have an agreement that's focused on our needs primarily, but looking to advance the world agenda. And what is happening here is that you see the EU trying to strengthen itself, to increase its gravitas in the United Nations, because, and I mean, I am still going through this agreement and all its implications, if I may say so. But you have a situation where the EU wants to join forces with the ACP, within the ACP, so that it will have, let us just say, because the agreement provides for joint negotiations, right? Where out of the 193 UN countries, the EU plus the ACP will be 106. So you can see what implications that has for implementing and advancing EU policy and EU agenda, which may not necessarily coincide with our agenda within CARICOM and also the African countries, but yet still it will have the benefit of the numbers it requires to push its own agenda, which may not necessarily coincide with our agenda. So you can immediately see what is in this for the EU, as opposed to what is in it for us. The other thing that is really important with this new agreement is that the financing mechanism has changed. So whereas we had the European Development Fund, the EDF, with Cotonou, where there was common ownership and there was a defined financing arrangement, where there were specific funds allocated to the development of our countries. This is no longer the case with this agreement, where financing will be within the EU general budget. And the question is, Maxine would know more about this than me. The question is, how will we now, as countries, as developing countries, access these resources? What criteria will be set for us to access these resources? And this is where the whole question of gender will come in. What are the set criteria that will be used to determine whether we are acting in keeping with the agreement so we can access resources? And that is where all of these terms that are talking about will become so very relevant. So what's important is, I mean, agreements always look really good on paper, always. I mean, people who drafting these agreements are experts. They know exactly what they're going after. The terms are particularly left ambiguous, particularly left so. But the question is, because there is no glossary, because there is no set definition, whose definition will be used? And that will be critical when it comes to accessing resources so that we can do all of the great things that the agreement provides that we can do. So it's all good on paper. We can have the finest plans, but if we can't access the resources to implement them, they're worth nothing. And this is why you have 35 countries, including 7, I should say, I'm not quite correct on this, how many Caribbean countries haven't signed. Maxine, maybe you can help me here. But you have a situation where this is why you have at least 35 countries saying no, we're not prepared to do that. And in addition to that, I mean, Namibia, for example, pointed out that with this agreement, there are at least 80 agreements that this agreement is going to bind or seeking to bind their country to, but they have not yet agreed to these agreements. So you are looking at a situation where in one sweep, by the signing of one agreement, countries are going to be committed to agreements that they have not yet committed themselves to. And so this is why it's really important for us to look at particularly those terms that are controversial, because at the end of the day, the EU have made it very clear that human rights is a priority for them. And I certainly can speak to examples where I have had situations where I've tried to access funding for certain projects, and that was during my time as Minister of Foreign Affairs. There's a certain agency, an international agency that I was dealing with. It was linked to the OAS, mind you, not linked to the EU. And we were trying to access funding for an agricultural project. I mean, we were trying to grow cucumbers and tomatoes and cabbages. And we had prepared the proposal. It was all agreed. And just when the funding was about to release, we were sent a code of ethics to agree to. And when we looked at the code of ethics, I mean, there were some terms that we could not accept. And we almost lost the opportunity to get the funding because we said that we were not signing on. The only reason why we were not denied the funding was that the country that was providing the resources for that particular project stepped in and said, no, we are providing these resources and we would like them to go to this country. This is the only reason why. But the agreement will not state on the face of it that it's requiring countries to change their laws. It will not do that. What it will do is use those terms which have been used, and when it comes to approving funding, it will say, well, have you been acting in the spirit of this agreement? And the question is, who will determine that, and how will it be determined? So that is where the issue is.
Well, this is something, you know, that we have raised over the last several weeks. As a matter of fact, I campaigned in 2022, and one of the areas that I raised was a UN resolution that was passed by the United States. In the United States passed it in the UN by consensus, which made it necessary for countries to sign on to this sexual orientation and gender identity program in order to have funding. Um, and I raised the matter because I don't believe that as sovereign countries, people should be dictating to us what our values are in our countries. I don't think Barbados has a right to dictate that to St. Lucia. I don't think St. Lucia has a right to dictate that to the United States. But what we have found is that there is a concern raised, and I'm going to try to put up the three areas, and I trust you'll be able to see them, and I hope they will be clear. There are these three articles that I hope you're seeing it well on the screen. There are these three articles here that I believe the Archbishop of the Catholic Church in Trinidad referred to, and incidentally, there are several other international agencies that refer to these identical three articles. Family Watch was one of them. A couple of the other organizations, I can't remember all of them now, not necessarily governmental. Several of them were charity-based and so on. Raised these areas, and you can see the areas that are underlined in red. Now, in his comments, the Deputy Prime Minister of Namibia referred to the treaty not having a glossary of terms or definitions section to ensure that all parties have the same understanding of terms which may pose a problem in the implementation and evaluation process. That was one of the paragraphs that he referred to. And I wonder if we could take a look at these articles and probably begin to explore why we should be having a concern if these areas are not necessarily defined. We're talking here about commit to sexual and reproductive health and rights in this context, and I've understood from the United States government's position that when they talk about reproductive health, they are speaking specifically about abortion and not necessarily the reproductive health of women. And that is my understanding. I stand to be corrected. Again, it's repeated in Article 38. And then in Article 48, we see this matter of comprehensive sexual and reproductive health information and education. And this is where, in the light of what is facing us, both here in Barbados and across the region, we have raised concerns. So I wonder if you could take a moment and, from your standpoint, address those areas that are there on the screen before you.
If I will go first. Let me say that starting at the first article 36.
36. Mm-hmm.
36, where it says commit to sexual and reproductive health and rights in this context. Now, I have no difficulty with the term, but taking the point you made, how is it defined? Because there may have been a definition used. I mean, because you take that, but then you come down to Article 48, where it talks about comprehensive sexual and reproductive health information and education. And if you would recall, in Barbados earlier this year, there was a whole discussion about this issue of comprehensive sexuality education and what it meant, how it was going to be introduced in schools, what was the content. So for me, I mean, I was reading an article which talks about human rights in relation to an article from the European Union. And on the surface, it is fine. But when we start to apply definitions, for example, after my time, but school children in Barbados were exposed to sex education or whatever it was called. Now, the substance, the content, the curriculum for these things evolve. And as I said, if you go and do the research, and I don't want to take us all back, so I think Barbadians remember that discussion. So right away, you move from something and then you come down to something in Article 48, which is more expansive. But none of these things are defined. So are you saying to Barbadians, Just trust us that what we understand and what in fact, first of all, let me understand from officials in Barbados, how are you defining these terms? How are you applying, these, and how are these terms applied from the perspective of the other party to the agreement, that is the European Union, or the other parties, because you're talking about 20 something countries. So, I have read the reactions, but I say to Barbadians, because this has been my approach, I need to understand what it is that I'm signing on to, what I'm discussing. In my years of teaching, one of the first things that I always say to students, you need to have a working definition of the terms you're using, so that when you go into argue, you're making it clear, you're understanding. Now, if there are two parties, we need to make it clear that there's common agreement, not only understanding, but common agreement as to how these things are defined and applied. So we know, and I'm just gonna pause here. We know what, when you do the research, for example, in relation to Article 48, how that education and information has evolved, and there are continuing arguments as to whether or not the subject matter, the age cohorts to which the information is applied, if these things are appropriate or not. So right away, I say that when we start to look at these, before I could start arguing, I need for them to tell us, these are how we're defining these things. And so that's a critical starting point. I don't know, Sarah, what your thoughts are on that.
Certainly. I mean, I have to say that I too used to be, I used to take these words just at face value. I interpreted them in accordance to my own cultural context. I remember very clearly when I first became a minister of government, I was Minister of Health. And I went to the UN and called for reproductive rights, because in my context, it never meant abortion to me, because in St. Lucia, we just saw it as calling on the empowerment of women, and we left it as that. But it was when I went to the UN, I realized that these terms, when I went there as a deputy permanent representative, it was then I realized that these terms, in fact, have a different meaning in the context of the space. And it was, as MAXINE said, now we know this is what it means, because it was out in the open. Even when I was the minister, when I first came into government, the ministry was the Ministry of Health and Women's Affairs. And it was during my tenure, it was changed to gender relations. And in my mind, this was not a problem, because when gender was used, naturally to me, it meant male and female. I couldn't conceive of it being anything else. Now, certainly that has changed. But those who were lobbying our governments from outside, I mean, the idea didn't just come out of the blue. It came from outside. It came from all of these spaces where this had been orchestrated, even from before. Yes. And we were just accepting these terms in their normal interpretation. And we didn't see anything wrong with them. So it was under my tenure that it was changed to gender. And it was not a problem. Had I known what I know now, I would certainly have asked questions. And that is, again, this agenda is just moving further and further and further. So we started with the LGBT. Now we've got everything else. I mean, how many sexual orientations are there? We don't even know. And we're not allowed to have a finite number anyway. So how can there ever be true agreement if the parties are not agreed? If words are not defined, I think they mean one thing, you think they mean something else. How can there ever be true agreement? And why is there a shroud of secrecy over this? Is it something that we will come to find out after we've committed ourselves? The fact that so many countries are not signing means there is a gray area. Why can't we stop, remove the cloud, have an open discussion? Let us make sure everybody knows what they're agreeing to, and then let's move on. There clearly is an imbalance of power in all of this. Why? It's down to money. At the end of the day, it's down to money. It's down to who has the resources and what are less wealthy countries prepared to sacrifice to have some access to resources. At the end of the day, this is what it is. And what I find unfortunate is that the powers that be, and I have to say it, know exactly what we're talking about. They're just pretending that they don't know. They're saying it's a storm in a teacup. They know very well it's not a storm.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Very well. And I have to go back to the time I spent at the United Nations as a delegate, as a negotiator. You know, the people who want to call us out and say that we're making a storm in a teacup know very well that at the United Nations, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of coercion. On the face of it, it's supposed to be one country, one vote. On the face of it, it's supposed to be that we're all sovereign and we have as much say as any other country, but it is not the case. I personally, at the United Nations, I've been threatened, I've been bullied, I've been harassed by UN agencies because of speeches I've made at the United Nations, because of positions we've taken at the United Nations. So it is a place not of unanimity. It is not a place where even when you have agreements that have been purportedly negotiated by consensus, there is no true consensus at the United Nations. It's a place where more powerful countries bully smaller nations, and it's a place where United Nations agencies themselves threaten and intimidate countries so they can take certain positions. So even where you have agreements that have United Nations, there is consensus agreements. We never look at what the reservations the states have made. We never go back to that. We never go back to the statements the countries make on the floor to say how much all of the bullying tactics that happen behind the scenes. We never go back to that. We just say it's a UN adopted document. We just say that, but we never go behind to see really what happened. So there is certainly a lot here that needs to be sorted out before we go ahead and sign this agreement. The EU knows exactly what it wants. It knows why it's withholding these resources, and it's going to manage it themselves. We have even EU countries such as Hungary and Poland that have sought written assurances from the EU that they will not be pressured into accepting that sort of liberal agenda. So if there was nothing to make a fuss about, why it is you have EU countries themselves have had to insist that their rights be protected on these issues and that their sovereignty be respected on these issues, the very issues that we have a problem with. Why is it that?
Well, Maxine and
sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Maxine,
No.
just trying to manage this all the technology.
That's all right. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with Zoom StreamYard. I'm still learning the StreamYard end. But
That's all right.
the last several years that we have, as a country and as a region, having gone through the pandemic, and I think it has manifested across the world, where citizens simply do not trust their governments anymore. I think that is a global statement I can comfortably make, because we have been, and I'm going to be brutally frank, we have been lied to. I hosted several online presentations from some of the top doctors. As a matter of fact, I hosted a program with Dr. Maloney, the originator of the mRNA technology, and he shared a lot about it, which up to this evening, I was watching a CNN broadcast, which was attempting to label some of the doctors that were still on the position to do with the jokes. I'm told I can't use certain words here, Sarah, so pardon if I use some Bajan dialect. um, with the jokes and so on, as misinformation and so forth. And I think what has happened is that there has been such a decline in trust that people are no longer prepared to accept what their governments say. Up to this evening, I watched a video on the UN floor from the Prime Minister of our country. She's a very, I consider her to be a very good speaker. But she spoke on the platform. Um, as Bezos would say, she lambasted the United States and its position with countries like Haiti, and she chastised the European Union. And she made a statement which, I sent the comment off to my wife, and she made the statement on transparency. She called for transparency. And in our country, and I'm sure probably in St. Lucia, what people are simply asking for is to be tell us the whole picture. Don't just feed us what you think we need to hear, because in 2023, we are simply not prepared to accept that anymore. I certainly am not. I am not as exposed as you ladies would have been to a lot of the inner operations, but have done a lot of research. And if I have found what I have found in my own research, certainly my governmental ministers, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and all the rest of it must know this too. And it can't be hidden from them, even while it is being hidden from the citizens. In one of the shows, I shared a video from the World Economic Forum, the WEF, which placed on its schedule a member of the LGBTQ2 plus grouping to advance the cause of the agenda within the context of economies. And I share that video here, and I'm saying, if I could get this information, this must be known to the Prime Minister, this must be known to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and they must know the fundamental values which the Prime Minister spoke about over our last 48 hours relative to Barbados and its family values. And I, as a minister of religion, I talk about the fact that values emerge from a belief system, and fundamentally within the Caribbean, our belief system has been Christian, where we believe in the family unit being a husband being a male, a wife being a female, and children. So that any change to that would be
And
an affront, so to speak, to the
notice
Caribbean.
I'm not okay, you're back.
No,
Okay.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was saying that I was not hearing you, and the screens for three of you went blank for a moment. So I think we may
Oh.
be having
May have had
connectivity challenges. So I was just, yeah, a
yeah,
glitch
yeah,
of some type there just now.
yeah. So, so these are questions obviously that would be raised at this particular point in time, because there's a sense in which people are beginning to feel that there are external elements forcing an agenda upon us as Caribbean people, which we are not only foreign to, but we are a bit resistant to. It's not that we're trying to determine what people's sexual involvements are, or what they learn, and they can. But we certainly want to protect our children so that they can learn arithmetic before they learn how to have sex. We want to make sure they know how to speak their alphabet before you place in front of them books that are pornographically explicit, which, as far as I recall, and I stand to be corrected, is a bit of a violation of the whole rights of protection of children. So I don't know what your comments would be. Caswell, I don't know if you'd like to jump in for a moment and add to the discussion relative to this. But certainly, Maxine, Sarah, you all can feel free to just interject at any time.
Well,
After
thanks, Freddie.
Caswell, I'll come.
All right, thanks, Freddie. I was enjoying the thing there, and I didn't have a lot, but you said something there that you and a lot of Barbadians seem not to understand. You're saying that the ministers that we have should be able to see these things too. We have 30 people from one party in the House, but we don't have a lot of ministerial material in those 30 people. And that is the problem. There are basically a bunch of followers who take the lead from one person, and they have no mind of their own. They cannot stand up. That's why I have such an admirer of Sarah Flood BEAUBRUN, because I enjoyed and admired her when she was battling in St. Lucia, and I'm not even going to say what position she's taken, if she was right or wrong. It's just that she believed what she was saying and she stood by it. We don't have politicians of that caliber in Barbados. I salute this lady. The people we have in Barbados are basically followers, mendicant followers. They get a good salary and they will not rock the boat because this is their lifeline. They're not going to get that salary anywhere else, most of them. And they are not representing the people who put them in the House of Assembly. And everybody can say, they don't expect them to be smart. We have a guy in there who could barely read, remember? When he was reading the oath, he said, "Her Majesty hears," and
Maxine, please be here.
So I said, "How did he know what Her Majesty hears?" He's Prince Philip. He was. But it was inside myself though. But he couldn't read. But he's elected because we have politicians like versus, and I'm not afraid to say it, handpicked by the Prime Minister because she wants people who are that she can bully and who are less intelligent than she is. And there are so many people, that are more intelligent that can, but she don't want them. As a matter of fact, she's on the other end, but she had a vision. She had a desire. People told her that she was bright, misled her for all her life about that score, and tell her that she could be prime minister. She better not believe it. Then she stacked her candidates with people who she can control. And then we have mindless followers who would go out. And like they couldn't get me to accept a lot of the things that these people are pushing. I would say, no, I can't do that. As a matter of fact, some years ago, when I used to be a member of the Barbados Labour Party, they offered me to run. Now, this is the first time they offered. And before it was the leader at the point in time, and I said to him, I do not want to be a candidate simply because I believe that anytime two people sit down together and always agree, one is an idiot. And I said, well, if you have 17 or 18 sitting down and always agreeing, you know, idiots ain't got there. And I must be able to say at some point, I do not agree. I will not do it in the House. I will do it in the parliamentary group. I will do it elsewhere, but I must be able to say. And then if I can't say it, I will tell you very sorry, but I will have to vote my conscience. And then that will go. So he said, okay, you don't bother. Because they don't want people who can think, who can stand up. Unfortunately, what we are seeing now, signing off on all these foolish agreements, is exactly coming from that long line of mendicant people that they put in the House. They're going and sign off on anything. I watch it. I heard the Carrie Simmons saying, "Oh, that there's nothing to worry about." Ask him if he read the agreement.
But the agreement is 403 pages long.
He ain't gonna read anything that long.
And to be honest with you, you know, I I am very happy for the specific articles that were highlighted because I started to read it and I don't think I got past page 60 something or something like that because I really had an interest in finding out.
I got a little further than you, but I
Yeah.
didn't get all the way down either.
Maxine, you wanted to say something a
Yeah,
moment ago.
a couple of things. One, and just to reiterate, because I think at the end of the day, I want to say this, and perhaps in response to Cleveland's question, what do we cancel? I don't know that you have to cancel the agreement. I think we need to have our leaders within CARICOM sit and talk to the citizens of the region as to what are there's understandings of what they're signing on to. What are we expected to do? How are these terms defined? How are they going to be applied? Because at the end of the day, and I always remember, we're talking about inclusivity and all of these things, but yet we are in the process of that excluding persons who do not have, who do not share certain agreements. I, for one, I am pro-choice. That so when we talk about human rights or whatever, I can tell you what. But when we start to insist that we have to accept, let's say, the whole issue of definitions of gender, if the issue of comprehensive sexuality education and all that is involved, because I've done a lot of work on it, and we are talking about introducing to minors, to little children, a whole set of information that we can object to. But there are certain countries within the family of nations that they will not accept these, and nobody's challenging them. But we are expected to do this. And I want to say this in relation to the whole agreement, because as I started, I want to make the point that the framers of this agreement, the people within the European Union, they have taken this position, and I made some notes, and I would read them because of time. One of the arguments that has been put forward, because I remember when this matter was raised on Sunday on Brass Tacks, I put this question. The minister had unfortunately gone already, but I put this question: what has changed? And this is one of the notes that I made from some of the readings, and this is what is suggested. Since 2000, when the Cotonou Agreement was signed, it was argued that there must be there have been significant changes globally, and I think Sarah touched on them in terms of how the European Union is seeking to integrate its approach with that of the United Nations. That in itself is not wrong, because there are important aspects of the 2030 agenda that are important. If we talk about poverty alleviation and all of these things are fine. What makes me question these things is when we are seeking to do this, what conditions are people seeking to impose on countries that are looking for financial and other support? So it goes on to say that there significant changes globally, and member states then who are party to the Cotonou Agreement have now been asked to approach this whole thing differently. So what they're suggesting is that impacting on the negotiations that took place are a number of things. Sarah touched on what I call developments in the multilateral agenda, the United Nations 2030 agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. Again, I say that when we look at those, there is significant benefit in those, but the question is what else obtains around these that
That's
some
right.
nations, some jurisdictions are seeking to impose. As I said, if you're talking about hunger, if you're talking about eliminating hunger, poverty, these things, women's rights of all people, those are important. They also talk about, so there's a whole network of things, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which really is talking about aligning financing, flows of money, financing flows, as they call them, and policies which impact on the environment and so on. So they're saying, look, there are several agreements that we have taken within the United Nations family. The Paris Agreement is the one about climate change and Barbados. And I must say that when it comes to small island developing states, we can go back to the early 1990s when our late Prime Minister Sir Lloyd would have been involved in that. The Europeans are now talking about a new consensus on development, and that is interesting because they're saying within the European Union, they want to have a common approach. Now, when you start to look at that, my question is, as you seek to have a common approach, what are some of the critical elements of this? And so, I say to Prime Minister Motley, I say to Prime Minister Gonzalez, I say to all the heads of CARICOM, respect the rights of citizens for information. I mean, when I look at this, we are talking about those pillars, particularly which fall under the human rights pillar. And when we start to look at things like issues of gender, because as you said, gender now has been defined much more broadly. And the question is, you can have those definitions, but are you imposing those definitions on member
And that's
states within the ACP who do not share those definitions? And that is part of
and
what
that's the
we're saying.
problem.
Talk to us about
Yeah,
those things. Precisely. Talk to us
but
about those things. I was
Maxine,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, let me ask a quick question here because I heard Sarah make mention. I think it was Hungary, Sarah, that you mentioned about drafting some documentation to the EU with regards to specific areas where they were having challenges, and I correct me if I'm wrong in my interpretation of it. Would prefer not incorporate those as a part of their movement in the agreement. Are we in any position at this point in time to do similar to that? Where okay, you can not sign off now on the agreement because we've signed it and we're bound to it for now 20 years. But can we now present to the EU any form of documentation or however you care to put it from an international perspective that would say, okay, yeah, we agree with these things, but these areas here, we are not going to be satisfied to have these imposed upon us, etc. Are we in a position to do anything of that nature?
I think that Jamaica, well, at least some of the groups in Jamaica are lobbying their government to have an interpretation agreement um, based on Jamaica's own perspective and to make that a condition of signing the agreement. So I think it's, I mean, certainly the EU would want to move forward with signing of this agreement. And depending on how our countries are prepared to take a firm position, insisting that there needs to be a glossary of terms or there needs to be an interpretation and an understanding of what these words mean, or there needs to be assurances that countries will be able to interpret according to their own value system. So it all depends on how prepared countries are to insist on some greater clarity or assurances. Now, in terms of CARICOM, I'm not sure we have a very good history of sticking together on things like that. I mean, sadly, within CARICOM, I mean, I have seen instances, Maxine, you probably hung around uh, these scenarios more than I did, but I saw a number of situations where, as CARICOM countries, we had a common understanding. We were going to go with a certain position. When we turned around, there was individual brokering by individual countries with
Yes.
United Nations or with the US. Because at the end of the day, countries are going after what is in their best interest individually, even though we we are CARICOM. So, and certainly on these issues, we don't even have a common position. CARICOM does not have a common position on the issues we're talking about here. I don't think that these issues have ever been discussed at the heads level for there to be a common position. So we recognize that even within CARICOM, we don't have a common position. But what we should and could have a common position on is respect for our sovereignty. We don't have to agree on these issues, but we can certainly agree that we have a right to have our position. But even that doesn't work because we always find there's individual brokering behind the scenes. It always happens. It just happens. So, because at the end of the day, we individual countries, you may have a project already in the pipeline that you're hoping that you're going to fund through this agreement, or you have a bilateral discussion with one of the key EU countries here, and you're expecting them to fund a very important part of a manifesto promise that you've made to your citizens. You have an election coming up. This is what happens in the real world. That's what happens. It's what's in it for me. So I don't even think Caribbean countries can or will. Well, I have my questions as to whether, even as a unit, we can insist. I mean, some of us have already signed. But you know what I do have a serious issue with? I was thinking as you were speaking, Dr. Nichols. There clearly is a very controversial and important issue to be sorted out here. What you find is when we raise this issue, and it happened when there was the panel with your Minister Simmons, the moment we raise issues, we're labeled, you know? So,
That's the
oh, you're
problem.
just a
Yes.
conservative or you're a Catholic reformer. That's what he called me. I mean, I don't even know him. I've never even met him before.
You're lucky.
But the moment I raised this issue, he just right away labeled me rather than address the issue I've raised. That's the
Yeah,
problem.
very dismissive. Very
That's right.
No, she's very lucky, and she doesn't realize that she's lucky. She doesn't need to meet somebody like that.
Right.
But you
Right.
see,
That's
Rather
the
than raise, and you know, he left the forum and never addressed the issue. Now that is
no,
what I find is sad. You know, we will have a difference of opinion, but I mean, I'll listen to you. I will convince me with by the strength of your argument. You know,
yes.
do not coerce me, but convince me. You know, with your argument. But so it's just a question of because we raise this issue to the community, speak up, we're labeled, and they move on without addressing the issue that we've raised. That's the problem I have. And
Just like,
secondly,
sorry, go ahead, Sarah, go
yes,
ahead.
secondly, on the whole question of the sexual education to children, of course, children need to be educated, but parents have a prior right to determine the education that children receive, particularly when you're talking about children 8, 9, 10. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the uh, human rights document that is most universally that has universal acceptance, recognizes the prior right of parents to education. You want to jail parents who want to educate their children according to their religious beliefs. This is what is happening in the EU countries that we are seeking to partner with.
and
And
it's
this,
also happening in Canada, and it's also happening in the United States.
and this is the interpretation that they will want to hold us ransom.
Correct.
This is the reality, and this is what uh, government ministers who want to go ahead with this, they want to deny that this is happening. And when you present them with the facts of actual cases where this has happened, they pretend that they never heard about it. When it's right there, I mean, it's a fact that can be proven. So there is an element of dishonesty. And this is what I reject. I mean, I can discuss with anyone. You know, let's put all the facts on the table. Let's disagree. But stop playing games.
Yes.
Stop playing games. If something is so good that you will sign it, be prepared to defend it head on.
Yes. You know,
No, they
there
don't
as you
defend,
would
they abuse.
you would expect me as a minister of religion to reach into the good book and pull a verse, and I want to do that. You would expect it of me. Listen to this interesting one. When the king is concerned with justice, the nation will be strong. But when he is only concerned with money, he will ruin his country. That's a pretty wise expression, I think.
And you know,
You know, I think that we need to pay attention to our values, and I see Mr. Arthur Shopper is in our back room awaiting. He doesn't have a lot of time with us. Just I think just probably now about 45 minutes, and he is one of the persons, Sarah, Maxine, I think you might have met him on one of the shows before, am I right? Or you weren't on that show? Not sure if Maxine is hearing. You're hearing me, Maxine?
No, she's
Yeah,
refreshing.
she's refreshing. Yes, Sarah, you may be meeting Arthur for the very first time. He is. I'm going to let him share a little bit about himself as we introduce him to you. Arthur, welcome to the show. We are happy to have you on this program with us. We are looking into the Samoa agreement with two former ministers of foreign affairs.
Perversion.
Sarah Flood BEAUBRUN. She is from St. Lucia and was originally very involved with the government in St. Lucia. She was a member of parliament and also Speaker of the House of Parliament in St. Lucia. Maxine, okay, there's Maxine again. Let me get her back in.
Absolutely.
Of course, Maxine is no stranger to us. I was asking you, Maxine, you had met Mr. SCHAPER before, Maxine. Had you met him on one of the shows before?
I mean, you.
So
You're going and coming, and Caswell, you have some good music in the background, but it could be a little distracted.
Again, you're breaking. Try turning off your cameras for a bit and see what happens.
that might work. Yes.
Yeah, I can turn mine off. My unit here is quite strong. Are you hearing? You're hearing everybody hearing okay there?
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you now, but before you were breaking up, so I was missing much of what you were saying.
Okay, you're still hearing me good there? Maxine, you're still hearing me good because I just turned on my camera.
Yeah. I'm hearing you now still. Let's see what's happening. Let me turn back on mine and see what happens.
Yeah.
If it continues to think that the turn off, okay. Right.
Yeah. No, I was introducing Mr. SCHAPER, Arthur SCHAPER, to the show this evening. Arthur, just share a little bit with us again about your organization and what you seek to do relative to the whole aspect of being able to push back on things of this nature.
Well, thank you so much, Pastor Nichols, for having me on the show again. It's good to see you again, Caswell. How are you this evening?
I was not well, but I'm not back to my 85%, but
okay,
I'm getting there.
Good. And nice to meet you, Miss BEAUBRUN and Miss McCLEAN. Nice to meet both of you. I am learning more about this very contentious push of Mia Motley and the Samoa agreement. It's just horrific and offensive. Just all of these government leaders just ignoring their own people and ignoring their own country and legacy and pushing everyone and everything into these international agreements where countries surrender their sovereignty is just disgusting. It's just horrifying. But briefly,
if I might, I want to. If I might, I need to stop you there. As a former foreign minister, I really have to bring some balance to this. These agreements, there are several of them which are important. I think critical to this is that there are some changes which we need to be made to understand, because I can tell you that I would have been part of the implementation of aspects of the agreement that preceded this, the Samoa agreement. And in the absence of firm details, and that is where I thought the governments, including this one, they need to speak to the citizens, because elements of this are useful and important, but there are others that we do not understand, that have not been explained. I will not pretend to have read a document which is 400 pages, because this is the nature of these agreements in its entirety. And so I would say I can't be categorical in any condemnation of the agreements. And we have to be very careful about that, because, and I don't like to use cliches, but I will use one now in terms of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I think at the end of the day, I call on my former colleagues, some of them who are still in office. I call on our heads of government, and in the case where they're presidents and heads of state, to say to the people, these are the critical elements of this agreement. So I have to say that, because I would be wrong to, as I said, to allow a categorical comment to go in terms of the nature of what these are. There are positives to these, and there are also negatives. And where there are changes, we need to understand those changes so that we can take a definitive position on whether they are what has been introduced as new, whether those things are totally negative or positive. So I just had to do that. I couldn't let the show go on without making that point.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Maxine.
I would just, I mean, the big concern is, I mean, the largest concern, which many people have sounded off on in the Samoa agreement, has been pushing the whole, you know, so-called sexual freedom, sexual rights, LGBT identity, you know, perversity and corruption. And this is a big issue in many international agreements. In the United States, the former President Donald Trump entered into an agreement with Canada and Mexico, and there were LGBT elements in that agreement as well. And many people were hailing that new trade agreement as better towards or fairer towards the United States in terms of protecting homegrown industries, et cetera. My biggest interest will always go back to, we've got to fight this LGBT madness. And I will submit, you know, with respect to everybody's widespread experience, whether with international trade or international treaties or otherwise, if you've got a treaty that has these bad elements in it, right away there's a problem. That
okay, can I engage you, Mr. SCHAPER, because I need to, whether or not you are saying, because I believe that there are persons who are born and are who fall into the category of LGBT. Now, I've listened to the discussions that have taken place. I draw a distinction between what I see to be an agenda that is trying to force onto people, especially our children, of or expansions of what we understand. But I believe that people.
Okay, I would like to comment.
We're getting you.
You know,
just one moment.
Okay.
We're getting you coming and going, Maxine.
You know, I'm a guest, and I've been invited by Pastor Nichols, and I believe the four of you have had great comments to share, but I'd like to now contribute. And I appreciate what Ms. McCLEAN has now just shared, but I will now, okay. So Pastor Nichols, where would you like me to start? I know you had asked me to, I had shared an initial thought in responding to the discussion that the four of you were engaging in. And then you wanted me to talk about mass resistance briefly. I don't want to depart too far from your initial interest.
Yeah, no, the whole aspect of the agreement that we were discussing tonight really are some of these terminologies that are not defined within the context of the agreement, because there's no glossary to tell us what is meant by gender. You know, I share the perspective of a separation of agenda from individuals, because in my conversation with many of the individuals are not necessarily supportive of the agenda. Okay. As a matter of fact, I know of several persons within the LGBTQ2+ grouping who are not supportive of transgenderism. They're not supportive of males, transgender males using females' bathrooms, being involved in female sports, and these types of things, which is more the agenda rather than the particular lifestyle. We are always supportive of the fact that individuals reserve the right to determine whatever they want to do. But as Maxine was indicating, they don't have the right to impose it upon other persons. And I think that is what you may be engaging from the aspect of activism, is this imposition that comes along with many of these agreements that are often hidden, such as in this Samoa agreement, where there are 3 articles that address the matter out of 403 pages. You know, it's kind of slipped in through, as Caswilla would know, you know, things being slipped in through the back door, which once you sign and you're committed to it, then you discover what the meaning of these things are.
I would like to, well, getting to what mass resistance, our organization, has done around the world. We have fought this agenda, and we have defeated this agenda in many cases effectively, whether it's shutting down drag queen story hour programs that groom children, or states in the United States that pass laws to prevent change therapy for people who want to get out of homosexuality or transgenderism. One of the fundamental tenets of our organization and why we have been successful is that we stand for truth. And so I make a distinct departure from what Ms. McCLEAN has shared. No one is born homosexual. No one is born transgender. If that was her contention, I don't accept that. The science does not bear that out. There's a growing body of research which affirms that sexuality can change once underlying traumas are dealt with. Now, I do want to provide a broader context that every human being has natural rights, which must be respected. I do not esteem in any way what you see in some Muslim countries where they take homosexuals and throw them off of buildings. That is vile. That is evil. Yes, that is absolutely. A violation of natural law and natural right. However, I must protest if any country wants to push back effectively on this agenda, not affecting the children, not affecting the public concourse, not affecting the natural rights of all, you have to speak the truth. And to proceed from a false premise that, well, you're homosexual, you were born that way, there's nothing wrong with it, that's a lie. It won't work. That is an attempt or an effort or a premise that many pro-family groups, that many conservative groups have attempted to use, and they do not work. You have to speak the truth. And let me explain why this is important when it comes specifically to protecting the children in your communities. Think about this. So if you argue in a school board meeting or before a government committee and you say, you know what, we don't want our children being taught this, it's inappropriate. That's not, we don't have a problem with homosexuality. We don't have a problem with transgenderism. Just don't teach it to the kids. But then the question becomes, well, why not teach it to the kids? If there's nothing wrong with homosexuality, if there's nothing wrong with transgenderism, why is it that we shouldn't teach it to the children? And the answer, the proper, true, basic answer is these behaviors are destructive. They are harmful. It is a lie that people are born into these inducements or urges or misunderstandings of identity. This is a fundamental distinction that mass resistance has drawn against many other pro-family organizations. And we aren't always as well received. We are routinely attacked in the press. But on the flip side of it, because we stand for truth, because we assert this truth effectively, we win fights. And that's what is essential. And I just, in my own country, we have mothers groups, fathers groups, whatever. They want to work with groups that are outspoken about their homosexuality, outspoken about their transgenderism. And right away, they begin arguing with the parents. They begin arguing with the other constituents that are fighting a specific fight. Because at the end of the day, many of these, like there's a group called Gays Against Groomers. But the fact is that they are grooming as well because they assert that children are born gay. And no, they're not. That is a lie. That is an abusive lie. It is a destructive lie. And it is precisely this lie that is being induced and fostered by unscrupulous teachers, corrupt administrators, and brazenly vile global interests, corporate interests, whatever you wish to call them. So this is a broad assertion that we make to every group, to every country, to every community that wants to fight the LGBT agenda. You have to fight all of it. And for individuals, if someone has like same-sex attraction issues or identity issues, we don't have any problem working with those individuals if they recognize that the behaviors are not healthy and something to be overcome, that they don't advertise it, they don't flaunt it, they don't want to have a parade to celebrate it. Because everybody will have failings. There are people who smoke or drink too much or who struggle with other moral failings. We all have that. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That's the biblical revelation. But I must stress this. If you want to win this fight, to stop the corruption of youth, to stop the corruption of the public square, to stop the undermining of your rights as citizens and your country's sovereignty and integrity, you have to speak the truth. And that means that the whole alphabet of perversions must be rejected, that nobody is born in those, and that they shouldn't be fostered or promoted as such.
You know, we just had a statement up there. I'm just trying to get it back. I think it was Joseph Cadogan that I'll try to put it up here again. He says, I'm listening here and I'm having serious problems. If this agreement is a trade agreement, why is social issue included seriously now if it is a trade agreement? And this was one of the questions I fundamentally had. Why in terms of trade? Why in terms of funding? Why in terms of development and investment are we even engaging the aspects of sexuality and sexuality education?
Excellent question.
In the context of these trade agreements. I'm going to be brutally frank because what we are seeing, and I want to say this quite broadly, what we are seeing is, in my view, an attempted recolonization of countries that are pushing back at getting rid of colonization and getting rid of imperialism. And we have lived with this, with countries outside of our region dictating to us for God knows how many years. And I have not forgotten Prime Minister, our very first Prime Minister, the Honorable Errol Walton Barrow, making the statement, we will be friends of all and satellites of none. I have never forgotten that statement from the day I heard it as a young child to this very day. There's a terminology that we will agree to disagree, but we can still get along. I mean, my wife and I don't agree on everything, and we're still married. We just celebrated 41 years of marriage.
Congratulations.
And I can tell you, thank you so much. And I can tell you, by no stretch of the imagination do we agree on everything. So there's a necessity, the need for us, for our leaders who were elected by the people. And this is the contention I have. The contention that I have is that we are subscribing and accepting elements of these agreements. And as Maxine has said, a number of these agreements are, when you look at them, and they're quite good. They look quite good on paper, as you have indicated, Sarah. They look quite good on paper. But when you begin to drill down, I once heard someone say the devil is in the details. And when you begin to drill down into the details, you're left to wonder, but why is this here? What is the intent that you have? And in this particular agreement, the absence of a glossary, I raised this with you, Caswell, and Sarah, I will raise it with you again. You were formerly a Speaker of the House. But is it not a fact that when bills are introduced and brought before Parliament, that there is an opening area on the bill that categorizes the definition of every critical area in that document? Am I not correct in that? And if I'm not, please correct me.
I'll leave that for this.
There is an interpretation section in every bill, because you want to know. I mean, with every law, there's an interpretation section, because everybody needs to be clear what the terms in this agreement mean, and any term, particularly any term that can have a double meaning, it is standard in drafting. Standard, it's a standard in drafting.
You made the comment about these documents being put together by experts, and while you were speaking, I made this note: the Titanic was built by experts. I find sometimes that experts are not as expert as we often think they are. And I think because of the agendas that they have, their expert focus is within that direction. They're expressing things from an expert's perspective to achieve a particular goal. And I think it often tends to ignore the concerns that are raised. And I really take it quite seriously when I do raise a concern. If a person, I don't know, maligns me or something because I raise a question. And I think we have the right. We elected officials to represent us. We did not elect them to represent the World Economic Forum. We did not elect them to represent the World Health Organization, which incidentally, and I'm sure you and Maxine know, that by next year, Our governments have to make a decision signing on to information or signing on to a resolution or something of that sort that will give the World Health Organization complete control of our countries in the next global pandemic. That is not something that I am going to be supportive of our government surrendering the sovereignty of our country, regardless of what the Prime Minister has to say. Because contrary to her belief, we are far more informed and we have greater access to information now than we ever had before. And in a few moments, KEMAR will be coming on. He will be dealing with something to do with economics and so on. But it is no longer a case where we just are prepared to accept what our leaders just say.
I'm Freddie. I sat and I listened here for a while, and I listened to the discussion. And we have two diplomats. Because as Minister of Foreign Affairs, you're the most senior diplomat in your country. You're a pastor, and
But I'm not the most senior diplomatic in mine because I'm a pastor.
no. But I have two diplomats and a pastor
Yes.
and diplomats have diplomatic language and pastors. I don't have any of those things. And what I interpret,
you have a trade unionist language.
What I interpret, what I'm hearing is simply this. The I don't know if the non-Barbados ones know what a paro is, but a paro is usually one of those beggars on the street who dirty themselves on the road and that kind of stuff, and they're basically like I don't know what you call them. I don't know the best definition for paro. I don't know, but they're beg, they're dirty, they're beg, or everything else, and they need stuff, and what the European Union appears to me is that they're like the big dirty people who treat the powers badly. Sometimes if a power wants some food or wants some money, the fellas give him a golden shower. The government of Barbados is like a power, and they are taking some golden showers from the European Union and anybody else that can get money from. I'll tell you what a golden shower is for those who don't know what a golden shower is right now. Later on, the question of people being born LGBT, I was not born anything. I chose to be heterosexual. I could have been anything because I was born really cute, and I could have gone anywhere. But I made a conscious decision. God, mind you, but look at me now at 65, and I still look so good. I had to have been really much good back then. So I had a choice. I made that choice. I'm not trying to make it funny, but the fact is, I made that choice. And anybody else, they were born like me. They're born different. They were born a baby without much consciousness. The only thing you were born and you good at is the first thing you do is to feel for a nipple. After that, everything else is taught, or you learn it. Nobody becomes LGBTQRS heterosexual anything. You're never born that way. You become those ways. You make your choices, and you become what you want to become. So I reject the notion that some people might be effeminate from small. Doesn't mean that they have to be one of those things, because I have seen people who appear effeminate, and then they go and get married, have children. So it is not a question of because sometimes people were raised by a mother who keeps them in house to keep them soft. Don't let them run about with the fellas, don't let them go and climb trees and that kind of stuff. And everybody say he's a family and that kind of stuff. It's not that. It is just that his conditioning, his socialization was different. And we allow people to try to make us believe otherwise. I have a mind of my own. Everybody in this screen has a mind of their own. And I reject any government telling me that they are going along with anybody just to get the money, mind you. They're just to get the money. But why is the government getting involved in sexual orientation or anything else? when I was a little fellow growing up, there was no sexual orientation. But mind you, I'm in the same age group as Maxine. We weren't taught anything about sexual education in school. And I'm not saying that it is not a desirable thing, but I came up without sexual education. I don't think I did too badly. I have 4 kids, so nobody had to teach me it.
If I could jump in here,
please.
Caswell, if I could jump in here from my ministerial position, one of the things that we have identified, and I've often said, when couples come before me, particularly when the wife is pregnant, I've often said, be careful how you contribute to the mental state of the woman when she's pregnant, because psychologically, and it has been proven to be so. Psychologically, there's a communication process going on between the woman and the fetus in her womb. I've known of cases where people wanted to have a girl. There's a mother or even a couple with a strong inclination for a girl, and it turned out that the individual in her womb was not a girl; it was a boy. But because of that psychological transmission that is often virtually indescribable how it occurs, you have the person being born with a tendency toward certain aspects of life, and vice versa. And we have borne this out. We've had discussions with persons like Dr. Clyde Narramore and Dr. James Dobson on these matters. And so sometimes because of these things, there are people who will say, well, the individual is born this way, but it has been as a result of a lot of the psychological communication that has occurred during the time of pregnancy. And we are always very careful to ensure that we engage the mother to keep a stable sense in terms of when she's pregnant with the baby. But things can be changed. I mean, I know my wife came up through serious psychological trauma as a child. We know children that are being sexually abused as children and have gone through the appropriate counseling and so forth, and have transitioned to be extremely wonderful men and women. So there are aspects that we can engage and address for changes. But what some persons need to understand here within not only this agreement, but I've seen several other agreements, which is the reason I believe Arthur, I've asked Arthur on the show as well, is because there is now a link between these things, which never really, at least not in my day, and I hear you talk about how old you are, Caswell, 60 what, 65?
67.
I'm 65.
67, 65.
And you're saying how you're close
to, and you're saying how close you are to Maxine, but I am 66.
He's my junior.
Sarah, we're not going to ask you anything. I'm not going to permit that to be asked of you. You are our guest, and Arthur, we won't ask you either. But I'm 66, and I came up through school, and I don't recall all of these things. I got my education in terms of gender and so on in my secondary school years, but not in my primary school years. Secondary school years, where I began to learn more about biology and more about the human body, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the concern we have is that in a lot of these agreements now today, there is so much connection being imposed upon us, and this is the concern. And there seems to be almost as if you're under duress. You mentioned, Sarah, that you were trying to access funding, but then when the permission for the funding is forthcoming, it comes with conditions, and these conditions may not have even been visible when the application was made. These are some of the things that the reality that we're dealing with. As I expressed a very strong support of the Labour Party, the Barbados Labour Party, gender today is not defined as gender was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years. It means something different now. And so we want to be very specific as to what is expected of the citizens of our country when our government signs on to these things. And it's got to a point where, regrettably, it's almost impossible to separate them, because they're the ones that are putting the issue out there. We are not the people doing this. And this is what Minister Simmons has to understand, and Mr. Hinkson has to understand, that when we raise these issues, it is not us really raising them. It is the persons who you are approaching in terms of your agreement who are raising these matters.
It is
And
not only Hinkson and Kerry Simmons, because we are also called treasonous, and not by them. Remember?
I sorry to interrupt, but I told Mars I would have been on the show for an hour, and it's almost an extra hour so far. I need to,
dear me.
to leave
But
you.
I am very happy you stayed with us nevertheless. Thank you so much.
I just want to make one comment. I think somebody mentioned a trade agreement, but if you recall in my introduction, when I looked at the successive agreements, I would suggest that this agreement is not a mere trade agreement. But I have to run, and let me thank you for giving me the chance to share. Sarah, good to see you again. Nice to meet you, Arthur, and to the other two. How should I say, regulars? It's good to see you again. So,
Maxine, it was a pleasure having you in again, and I would hope that you would be able to extrapolate. Is that a nice big word to use, or expand on your closing comment there, relative to the whole aspect of the trade agreement? There's a lot of good in these things. We will not deny. I think the growing concern is just what's now connected with them. Maxine, thank you so much for being here with us. I don't know, Sarah, I don't know what time you committed in terms of the show. Marcia didn't mention that to me. So I don't know how long you have with us. If you also have to jump off, that's okay, because in a few minutes I know Arthur also has to jump off, and KEMAR will be joining us to discuss the aspect of the not just the Barbados ID, but the ID cards and the implications and the meanings in terms of our economy and what is being set up in terms of the demands that are going to be placed on us as citizens from that standpoint. So as we make a bit of a shift,
Freddie, while I have the former speaker here, I would like to mention something.
Before you mention anything, just let me formally thank Maxine and let me release her so that she can be free to go. Maxine, thank you so much. It was so good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
I have seen you on the shows before, but I haven't been hosting. I've been following even the shows when I'm not hosting.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, and have a good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good evening.
Bye. Good evening.
Yeah, Freddie, while I don't want this flat Bourbon to go before I mention this, because she's a former speaker and one more book. This thing than me. I was just a opposition senator and didn't keep me too long anyhow, 3.5 years. So I prefer. What I'm talking about is National Insurance Amendment number 2 bill. And the standing orders of the Senate, and I know them fairly well because I read them a few times.
But before you go into that, though, just let me bring the shift around. All right, before you go into the NIS bill, because Ms. Floyd BEAUBRUN was on to do with the Samoa agreement. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to jump off at this time. It's entirely up to you. You're welcome.
No, Freddie, I want backing. That's why I asked to speak.
I would not jump.
Okay,
I would not dare leave without answering or hearing Caswell's question.
Great.
I know nothing about the bill you're talking about. And I didn't even know the Barbados standing orders. So I'd be...
No, but I'm not normally our standing orders. Usually, I don't realize they're usually similar.
Yeah, but before we go on, I know Arthur's only committed himself to just for the hour, and so I know he's going to soon have to jump off as well. So just let me give him a couple of minutes, Caswell, before you moving to that. I don't know if Arthur, there's anything else you'd just like to share before you head out in terms of what we can do. We have been talking about what the government can do in terms of, making submissions to the EU and so on with regards to our concerns in those areas. We don't know if that is something that can be done. I would imagine that what a lot of what you're talking about in terms of success would have some legality involved with it as well. So I don't know if you want to take just a couple of minutes before you jump off, because I do know you have to go at 9 o'clock. You have to go. If I'd just like to give you a couple of minutes just to end up on that.
Maybe, well, what I definitely want to find out from the Barbadian community, the citizenry, are what are their larger goals for stopping this LGBT perversity that's trying to overrun the island. I'm the most committed to assisting as much as possible with that. I really esteem what we've seen in Jamaica, and I've shared in the past what we did working with people in the Cayman Islands. I know that you, Pastor, you were in the Cayman Islands for, I believe, last week before as well. That's what my key interest will always be, to fight back effectively against this. I definitely liked the sentiments and the statements from people in the last broadcast that I participated in, where there needs to be that massive civil action against the government, that the people have to rebel and frustrate the business as usual that has become so pervasive on the island. I want to assist with that as much as possible. That is my goal. I want to be able to see a mass resistance emerge there in Barbados, just as we have done in other countries. That to me is very key. And I know that based on the many comments that people have submitted, the messages that I've received through other channels from other citizens there in Barbados, that there is a real desire, there's a real hunger to push back on the abuses, to push back on the corrupt and the dishonor that normalizing homosexuality and transgenderism that it's trying to do to the island. I want to assist with that as much as possible. That's my key hope. Sandra Franklin, I really appreciate your comment. I certainly hope I'll have a chance to. My biggest interest is to begin to communicate individually and on a working relationship with as many people in Barbados to help you fight back. I love the point that I keep hearing, which is that the government should be responding to the people, and that's not happening. The government now, the Barbados Labour Party leadership, etc., is responsive. They're answering to the EU, to the World Economic Forum, and I want to get back to, at the outset, we have these trade agreements that have all of these social policies pushed in. I submit to you that it's the social policies or the antisocial policies that are the goal. That's what they are really interested in. And they slip in these perverse policies under the guise of free trade, better agreements, better protectionist policies, etc. That's the real issue. And so, I would disagree with the previous minister, with Ms. McCLEAN. I think that a policy has to be rejected outright when you have a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. If there's a little bit of unclean matter in a dish or in a meal or in a glass of water, you're not going to say, well, I can drink this. There's only a little bit that's bad. The whole thing is bad. And that a new agreement needs to be arrived at. I was doing some searches online, and I found a speech that the previous Foreign Affairs and Trade Minister had made in 2013. And I can see that there's been discussions about the Samoa agreement for quite some time. And that would indicate to me that there has been a concerted effort not to inform the general Barbadian public about what's going on. This is a very serious problem. In my country, in the United States, we have a very rigorous process because we have two chambers. Every treaty must be approved by the United States Senate, and the Senate is very reluctant to approve, well, just about anything. There is such an effort to resist any kind of supranational or international imposition on the country. But at any rate, I do believe that with the right strategy and the right commitment to informing people of the truth and engaging them to fight back against all these things, that the nation of Barbados can win and be a real model to the rest of the Caribbean community, how to fight back against this corruption. Because I'm hearing the outrage that people are sharing, the dishonor of how people's voting rights are dishonored, how people's voice is not heard. And I think that there is enough palpable outrage that can be properly channeled to fight back against all of this madness. Someone made a comment about Mr. Member of Parliament Samuel George. I'm happy to share this with everybody. I was speaking with a pro-family activist in Ghana this morning, and they are not only have they passed a strong pro-family program in their parliament unanimously, even though it's very evenly divided between the two major parties in the country, they are now investing in creating anti-LGBT clubs within the high schools. And I think that kind of a program is essential in Barbados, as well as in every country imaginable. Children need to be informed about the dangers of these behaviors and the agenda that's pushed upon them, the same way that children are taught the dangers of smoking and of drinking excessively or promiscuous sex in general. I think that kind of a proposal needs to be considered in the nation of Barbados as well. So those are some ideas. My keenest interest is to be able to communicate more with the pastors and the leaders and the labor organizers to fight back and to push against all this perversion in your country. That's my goal, is to be of service in that regard.
Well, we really appreciate that, Arthur, and you're on point in terms of the intent. The original intent is sexual transition and,
yes,
and family transit. That's the intent that is really at the forefront. And when you listen to any of the summits, Davos, or you listen to the World Economic Forum, or you listen to the one in India, I think it's on today. When you listen to any of them,
if I may, because my time is limited, you're not alone. We have a great example we can follow already. How could I forget? Bermuda. You had an arrogant court impose on that island nation that they had to recognize those foolish, false marriages, so-called same-sex marriages. And yet the parliament said, we're not going to go along with this. No, we won't do this. And then there was an extensive legal fight all the way up to the appellate courts that oversee, that oversee the Caribbean islands or the Commonwealth countries. And they succeeded. This little country of Bermuda is the first country I know of that said, no, we're not going to have same-sex marriage here. That kind of boldness I know exists in Barbados, and we want to make that happen. I think that's very important. We have hope even in my country. We have individual states that are pushing back against the same-sex marriage nonsense. You have to get to the very core of this. The whole goal is to undermine the family. And this whole LGBT agenda is about undermining the family. And when we understand that it's based on lies, that the behaviors are destructive, that you can speak the truth without undermining the natural rights of any or all individuals, you can win this fight. Yes, we would say, I'm learning to watch my language with the Barbadian community, but I always say right hand. We would say that about Mr. Joe Biden. I think that's my secret code, so I don't offend anybody. But we would absolutely, you just look at the two letters and you'll all understand. That's exactly how we feel about this vile man. In many ways, I hate saying this, being in the United States, we feel that we're suffering in a coup or in a Marxist undermining right now. It's a very precarious time in my country. And it's an embarrassment to have to admit this, but it's better to admit it than you can do something about it. So
and I think, unfortunately, Arthur, that many people do not see how all of these things are tied together.
Yes.
We just had the United States confirm the appointment of a gay ambassador to Barbados.
Outrageous. That is imperialism. That is arrogance. That is a smug imposition. One of the things we had Jamaican protesters that this was last year or the year before, they protested outside of the American embassy flying that shameful 6-colored flag. This is the kind of outrage that needs to emerge in Barbados. You do not get to minister to our country with people who abuse their bodies. And let's understand, this is not a private matter. This was a deliberate, exorbitant expression by my government, my country's government. I didn't vote for this government. Let me be very clear. to normalize and impose this. They do this in Hong Kong. They've tried to do it in Singapore as well. It is offensive. It is out. I agree with what Tobias has just shared. It's time to push back. And I think there should be protests outside of I'm an American, and I'm encouraging the Barbadian citizenry to protest and say, we don't honor this minister being in our country. You should absolutely do that. Just as the Jamaicans protested the American embassy for flying the shameful 6-colored flag. There's nothing gay about two men abusing each other, and there's nothing gay about any government or entity celebrating these destructive behaviors. This is a discussion, in fact, I've had with other leaders and pro-family activists in other countries. It's time to make a manifest presence and say, we don't accept or tolerate these abusive practices being normalized in our country. I love that term you use, Pastor. It is absolutely, it's neo-imperialism. It is neo-imperialism. It's vile and it's disgusting. It's arrogant.
But the danger, again, I say that people don't seem to understand how these things are tied in together, because as ambassador to Barbados, he's responsible for as ambassador to the Eastern Caribbean. And that's St. Kitts, Nevis, Grenada, St. Lucia, several of the other Caribbean countries. And being the ambassador who is quite high in terms of the promotion of the particular agenda, he reserves the right to issue or renew visas. And I don't think people quite understand the implications of this matter, because I, for one, maybe refused a visa simply because I am known to be an outspoken person against a particular agenda. Mind you, we're not outspoken against the persons, because we see the persons as people who are in much need of, in as much need for help as any other individual. But I don't think people understand the need for us to manage, when we're in this show, to manage the show in such a manner that we're able to tie all these things together. And show what will happen as a result of the agreements, the clauses that are incorporated with the appointment of an ambassador who is committed to the agenda, and the implications it has for citizens of the country obtaining visas for the United States and to visit the United States.
I would have to say perhaps you're being spared some real problems by not getting a visa to come to this country right now. Or perhaps maybe that's a good thing for the short term with the current administration. I will comment on this. Someone says, be cautious who you invite to speak. The man has an agenda. The man from the United States has an agenda. Yes, I've been very clear about my agenda to stop this homosexuality and transgenderism cult becoming normalized around the world. That is absolutely my agenda. I've been very open about that. Anybody can see my writings, my statements, the work that the organization I am privileged to work for. That is absolutely our agenda. We don't hide it. We don't create large trade agreements and then hide our intended purposes. I'm very clear. And this is an agenda more people should share. There's nothing vile or wrong about speaking the truth in this matter.
I find it amusing, when people consider that to be an agenda, but they don't consider what the European Union and the World Economic Forum and the United Nations are doing as an agenda. You need to get your information accurate, sir, and get a little more balanced. Thank you, Arthur. Appreciate you taking the time to be in with us. I know you'll be back in on another show upcoming.
Yes.
I've spoken with Katina in the Cayman Islands, who I think they ran a successful campaign.
Wonderful. Katina's wonderful.
And she is going to be in touch with you. We're going to try to get her on to one of the shows as well, that she can tell us how they went about doing what they did in the Cayman Islands, and what was the impact and implications of it. So thank you so much, Arthur. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. And we know you have a heavy schedule. We appreciate that so very much. Thank you. God bless you. And we look forward to you being back with us again.
Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. Have a great evening.
Okay, God bless. God bless. Good night. All right, Caswell, we are on the verge of having KEMAR coming. So I'm going to let you get the consultation, advice, and counsel of the former Speaker of the House.
Yes. In the Senate yesterday, it was yesterday, Wednesday, the 29th, the government passed the National Insurance and Social Security Amendment number 2 bill. The number 1 bill was passed in August in the Senate. What the number 2 bill did is to repeal and replace the number 1 bill. Because what happened here is that they put some things in the number 1 bill, and we saw them on the show, and we had marches, and we protested against them. So the government eventually conceded and took out at least one particular thing that we were complaining about. So the bill that was passed now, Wednesday, just 2 days ago, is substantially the same bill. We have in the standing orders 58 for all intents and purposes, and it says, once the second reading of any bill has been agreed to or negative, no question shall be proposed during the same session for the second reading of any bill, any other bill containing substantially the same provisions. That bill, if you look at the two, you can't really notice that there's a difference between the two of them. They're substantially the same, but they came and now we all, and that is what the standing order said. However, any standing order can be suspended during any sitting of the House or the Senate. That is Standing Order 74. That says any one or more of these standing orders may, after notice, and take particular thing of after notice, or with the leave of the president, be suspended on a motion made by a senator at any sitting. A motion under this standing order shall be decided without amendment or debate. Okay? So yes, they can suspend the standing orders, and they have a right to do so, a legal right to do so. However, there's a process for that. It says, and this is Standing Order 21, because it says here, remember I said after notice. There was no notice in the House, and nobody asked for leave to introduce this new bill. But it says here, 21, where under any standing order notice is required, such notice shall be given in writing, signed by the senator, and addressed to the clerk. Such notice shall be handed to the clerk or sent to or left at the clerk's office during the hours prescribed for the purpose. So, yes, on Wednesday, the leader of government business in the Senate got up and said she moved an amendment to the standing orders. There was no notice given to the clerk, and they never asked for permission from the president to introduce or to suspend any standing orders. And they just went ahead and did that. My view is that the particular piece of legislation was passed contrary to the rules of the House and of the Senate. And as such, it should not take effect. That is what I'm asking you, based on the standing orders that I read to you.
So it would be very difficult for me to give you an opinion on this without having time to study it myself. Just listening to what the rule is, it's difficult for me to reflect and give you an opinion on it, because I'm just hearing you calling out the provisions. I'm trying to follow what you're saying. I am kind of old school. In order for me to reflect on something, I have to have it written and I have to be looking at it in front of me.
Well, I understand that.
If you know what I mean.
Because I actually sat down.
Because I'm just hearing you saying, and I'm trying to, I would need to place this before me and reflect upon it and think about what the permutations are. So it's really, really difficult for me to give an opinion on a particular issue like that without taking time with the standing orders in front of me and reflect upon it.
No, but what I can ask you is,
although what I'm hearing you say is that a new bill was introduced entirely, I mean, even if there is one, I mean, you said there was Bill 1 and Bill 2, and the Bill 2 repealed Bill 1.
And replaced it
So
with
you're
the
talking
same thing.
about a new bill entirely. You're not talking about an amendment to an existing bill. From what you said, it was a new piece of legislation entirely. And in my mind, I'm just speaking generally. I'm not speaking directly on the subject matter you're talking about, because I would need to have everything in front of me. If you have a new law being introduced, it has to go through all its stages. Even if it's a small amendment, but you have just said it was replacing the one that was passed before. So in
The
my mind, it
repealed.
would have to go through all its necessary stages to become law.
No, well, here it didn't. What they did, they also suspended the standing order that says that the stages that it should go through. So they suspended that standing order as well.
Okay. Well, I would have to look at the whole thing, look at your standing orders, and look in order for me to give an opinion on it.
But the main question they said that you have to give notice, and they prescribe how notice is supposed to be given. But ignore everything I said about the national insurance, what the bills are. The rules say you must do it. If you're going to suspend the standing orders, you have to do it by notice or with leave of the president. There was no notice. Notice was not filed.
Well, if a certain procedure is prescribed, that procedure would have to be followed if it's going to be valid. I mean, you can't ignore a procedure and just go ahead to do things, however you like. If there's a procedure that's prescribed, it needs to be followed.
That is exactly what I was hoping to get from you, because there's a procedure prescribed and the government ignored it and went ahead and passed the bill because they wanted to have this bill in place today.
But what I know about Barbadians is that you all are not like St. Lucians that just take everything sitting down. I know that Barbadians are very astute, are very particular about things like that. So I'm sure that if that is the case, or that was the case, there are lots of you, I mean, you are not the only one who would be speaking about it. I'm sure that that is something that Barbadians will be asking questions about.
Somebody asked Caswell, but isn't that bill currently being debated? No, it is not being currently debated. It was passed. It was passed in one day in the House and then in one day in the Senate. No circulation to the country, nothing. They wanted to pass it to by and have it enforced by the 1st of December, and they passed it on the 29th because yesterday was Independence Day, and that would have been a public holiday, so there was nothing doing at that time, so they had to pass it on. The latest day is the 29th, and they passed it even though the standing order say you must give notice of such suspension. They didn't give any notice whatsoever. They just got up in the House and in the Senate and went ahead and did it regardless of what the rules are saying. And that is what I'm complaining about, because what the national insurance is to Barbados, people said it's your lifeline because it provides for pensions and stuff in later years. If you're sick and you can't work, it provides an income. And government is playing fast and loose with the national insurance and social security legislation. And they are taking it, and in doing so, they even ignore their own rules for passing legislation because they wanted it done, because the IMF wanted it done by the 1st of December. So again, you were talking about the Samoa agreement. We got another overarching group called the IMF that is dictating to the government, and government is ignoring what our laws have said, because this is not the first time that the IMF has told the government. They told them don't pay national insurance for those people you see were cleaning the streets after the ash fall. And government refused to pay national insurance. Remember that, Freddie, that was on your credit there? That was the IMF telling them no, because the wage bill would be too high. So they called them contract workers. They were not contract workers. They were working for the government. Eventually, now after some protests from this show again and others, the government then went back and back paid the contributions into the NAS after, but there must be pressure. And I think we need the pressure now because there is sufficient evidence to show that the bill was passed improperly in both houses.
Well, we certainly can. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I was just saying that, I mean, I think the principle that you're raising is really important. I mean, of course, I can't see whether it was passed, you know, in violation of the rules or not. But you see, these principles are really important because if it can be done for one thing, it can be done for something else. So this is what's important, the principle.
Yes.
And if I can be allowed just to make my closing comments, because I did agree on
Go right ahead.
8 and then it's 9. So, I mean, I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much for staying so long.
We thank you very much.
Yeah, but I just wanted to say, in terms of, someone asked the question earlier, why, if it's a trade agreement, there are social issues involved. And Arthur, you know, was basically saying that that is what it's all about, and it is what it's all about. At the end, I mean, my experience in spending time at the United Nations, more time is spent talking about sex and sexual orientation than anything else. I mean, this is where the agreements go into wee hours of the morning. This is where the pressure is put to bear. This is where the coercion comes. This is what it's all about, you know? And this is why I'm going to end where I started. When we were doing this agricultural program, trying to grow some cabbages and cucumbers, this is where sexual orientation came into it, when it had nothing to do with that. But if you want our money, if you want our aid, this is what's important to us. We're going to have to be able to push this down your throat. When the abortion law was brought into St. Lucia, we never asked for it. There was no cry from any women's lobby group asking for this. It didn't come from St. Lucia. It came from outside. It was inserted into this. This was a condition we understood later to receive other forms of aid, that you would have to legalize this law, as you can't get aid to do other things. So this is what's important for the Europeans and the US, and so they have stated that this is part of their foreign policy. This is part of their foreign policy, and so it is part and parcel of their agenda overseas. They've said it openly. So it is really sad when our own governments are pretending. I mean, the Europeans are not pretending. They're saying it. This is what it is. But we are just, in order to be able to go ahead and access these resources, we are lying. That's what we're doing. We are being dishonest with our constituents. But what we have to understand as people, we do have the power in our hands. At the end of the day, a politician wants to be elected. If he's not elected, he can't do all of the great things he's promised. So the most important thing for a politician is to win his elections. And even a handful of his constituents making noise and saying, if you do this, I'm not going to vote for you, is going to make a difference. So we need to know the power we have as people, as the electorate. If we don't keep ourselves informed, if we don't pay an interest in all of these issues, we will not know about them, and we will not hold our politicians accountable. So it's really, really important, forums such as yours, these discussions that we're having, that people can listen, can hear what's happening and understand what it is their leaders are doing on their behalf, they can hold them accountable. So I just want to thank you again for inviting me. It's just 2 late nights I'm having, and it does take a toll.
Tell me about it.
It does take a toll.
Well, we want to thank you, Sarah, for coming in. It was a pleasure meeting you, really, and I look forward to meeting you in person when I'm back in St. Lucia. We were just there in July with Reverend John Joseph. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. And of course, my good friend Mario Reyes.
Okay,
Uh,
well, I do know
yeah,
Mario.
a very good friend of mine. I helped him start the dealership there in St. Lucia,
Wow.
just around the time Nelson Mandela landed in St. Lucia. But that's another story for
Okay.
another time.
Okay.
Yeah, so we look forward to
Uh,
connecting with you when I am there in St. Lucia, and I won't be coming without my wife, that's for sure. I'll be
And
bringing
you
her
as
back.
well, as well. I hope that you can bring your wife who's from Balata.
we usually come every year, but COVID had us away
Wonderful.
from St. Lucia. I spent, for the last God knows how many years, I spent Christmas in St. Lucia because it's much nicer time, and then too, my mother-in-law spoiled me, and so she treats me like a king, and I prefer to be treated like that. So I go to St. Lucia every year.
Well, that's a little more
Yeah.
difficult for me because I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren that I have to spend Christmas with, so I can't
Yeah.
afford to fly them all to St. Lucia. So,
Anyhow, what I want
Sarah,
to say to you, though, however, it's always nice when you meet one of your heroes, and I always had the greatest admiration for you. From the time you were a speaker, I saw how you stood up, and I said, "Well, look, this is a woman I can admire," and I'm very happy to meet you now. I I was looking for a bit tougher person, because you held your ground, and I was looking for a toughie, but you're very nice, soft spoken and stuff, but you got your job done. So I'm very happy to have met you, honestly.
yeah, the
Thank you
same here
very
as
much.
well, Sarah. Thank you
It will
so
be a
very much for being
pleasure.
with us
Thank you
tonight.
very much. Have a good evening.
God
Bye-bye.
bless you. Bye
Bye,
bye.
dear.
Well, let's bring KEMAR in, Caswell. He's
Yeah, she's a
just
fighter,
before
boy. Yeah.
just before I release you, KEMAR, to flow. I just want to share a couple of these videos that Marcy sent me in symposium.
Friends in Barbados, you're warmly invited to attend an upcoming weekend symposium entitled Recover All, Addressing the Issues of Family, Gender, and Sexuality. My name is Philippa Davies, an attorney at law from Jamaica, and I will be speaking on the roots and fruits of the so-called sexual rights agenda and how we can contend for truth in the public space. I'll also share on how marriage and family life God's way can reduce crime, improve public health, and boost GDP. The symposium starts on Friday, December 8 at 6:30 p.m., continuing on Saturday, December 9 at 9 a.m., and will be held at First Baptist Church, Constitution Road. Registration is free, but you have to register by Wednesday, December 6 online at themarciaweeksshow.com. Please come out to be educated, edified, and equipped. The battle to preserve the image of God, the Imago Dei, is raging, but we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Looking forward to seeing you. Friends in Barbados, you're warmly invited to attend an upcoming weekend symposium. Friends in Barbados, you're warmly invited to attend an upcoming weekend symposium entitled Recover All, Addressing the Issues of Family, Gender, and Sexuality. The symposium starts on Friday, December 8 at 6:30 p.m., continuing on Saturday, December 9 at 9 a.m., and will be held at First Baptist Church, Constitution Road. Registration is free, but you have to register by Wednesday, December 6 online at themarciaweeksshow.com. Please come out to be educated, edified, and equipped.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Ann Gillies. I'm going to be joining you in the Barbados December 7th to 11th, and I'm going to be presenting 4 different lectures. First of all, I'm going to speak on damage by the predators among us, and this is a lecture about grooming, sexual grooming and abuse and pedophilia. Then the next one I'm speaking on is help, my child is same-sex attracted or identifying as a different gender. The third one is the impact of trauma on LGBTQ individuals. And the fourth one, and these may be changed up as far as order, is going to be on the acceptance and danger of pornography in our culture. I hope you'll join me. Thanks for listening.
Just wanted to make sure I got those ads in for the symposium that is upcoming. That will be December the 8th and December the 9th. We're going to be looking forward to hosting that at the Baptist Church there in Constitution Road. That's where it is. So just want to make sure we get these ads out and up so that we can make sure that persons are in attendance. Caswell, I was seeing KEMAR there just now.
Yes, I was too.
Just saw him drop out because he just looking for him to come back in there. But we had I think we had a good robust night, and it's easy for persons, Caswell, to make comments concerning how you manage the show, but you've got to be able to tie things together. And it's intriguing to see how, from all that was expressed here this evening, how everything just is networked. The agreement, the ambassadorial appointments, the matters to do with pushbacks, and how we engage the whole aspect of the gender agenda of these individuals, just trying to put everything together, because at the end of the day, Arthur is absolutely correct that is the number one agenda. Trade is not. Investment is not. Those are guises now for the number one push across the world. How do we know that? Because in every single agreement with every single country across the world, that is incorporated. It was incorporated with all of the countries in Africa. It was incorporated with all of the countries in the European Union, all of the countries in, of course, the OACS, Organization of American and Caribbean States, of which we heard tonight. We're talking about 79. So let me pull this up here while I'm waiting for 79 persons and 27 members of the EU, 79 persons of the OACPS. So it's wonderful to see how we are able to pull all these different persons in and pull everything together. We welcome you back, KEMAR. Good to have you. Sorry that we seem to have dug into a little bit of your time, but I am ready to go with you, sir. Good to have you here again. You'll just have to guide me through in terms of what you would want me to put up and at what time in terms of what you're dealing with tonight. So the floor is yours, sir. Go right ahead. Are you hearing us, KEMAR?
Right.
Yeah, we're hearing you. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. We're hearing you. We're hearing you. You're trying to get your camera going?
Right. Yeah. Well, good evening to everyone again.
Good evening to you. Good to have you.
Yeah.
Good to have you.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on two topics really, but in the interest of time, I only going to cover one.
Okay, you might have to turn off your camera. You might have to turn off your camera because it is probably not hearing us.
You know that background that he has
that's
takes a lot of thing. You need to get rid of that background.
Yeah, well, KEMAR, you can just go ahead and speak, because I will pull up the information that you want as you're ready for it. Are you hearing us, KEMAR?
Right. So I just wanted
there
to
you
touch
go.
on one.
Go ahead. You can go ahead, KEMAR. Don't know if he's not hearing us or what. Because I turned off my camera to probably give a little more bandwidth. Yeah, KEMAR, we're not hearing you. We're not hearing you. If you're speaking, we're not hearing you. We seem to be having a problem there. KEMAR, you wanna go and come back in again? Are you hearing him at all?
Hello?
Yeah, we're getting you there. We're getting you there. Uh-huh.
Right, you can hear me clear now?
Yeah, yep, hearing you loud and clear.
Right. As I was saying, good evening to everyone. I wanted to touch on two topics today, but in the interest of time, we'll touch on one. That would be the comment that was made by the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister about Barbados being the fifth or the fourth fastest growing economy in the world. That is not accurate information whatsoever. The Prime Minister would have to come and justify why she would say something like that, knowing that it's not true. Barbados, as a heavily indebted country to the international community, we had record level increases in debt under Mia Motley's administration. I have some photos that I put out earlier with the graphs and the like, which would actually show the levels of borrowing that the Mia Motley administration undertook. The company, not that one process. Yeah.
This one?
No. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Uh-huh.
This chart in particular shows the foreign debt levels in Barbados under Mia Motley from 2018 to 2023. And you will see that Barbados was approximately $2.9 billion in debt in 2018. That was under Frondel, when Mia Motley gave us the impression that the world was going to end if the DLP at the time borrowed any more money. Now, today we're actually $5.1 billion in foreign debt. And we can see that based off the chart. These are not my figures. These are the central bank's figures. Prepare the chart using my business. But the central bank, these figures are quoted from the central bank and IMF. So you can go and check them out for yourselves if you're in doubt. But as you can see, the chart here will show you the massive increase in foreign debt levels under the Mia Motley administration, which estimates to be about $4 billion, because this only speaks specifically to, or you want to get the full understanding of the foreign borrowing. But the next chart that I put up will show you exactly what they're owed to the IMF. All right. what we are owed to the IMF, but this does not include debts owed to the Chinese and debts owed to private investors who would have given us money. This specifically speaks to what we owe to the IDB, the IMF, the World Bank, the European Union, and under Frondel, Prime Minister, the debt owed to these institutions was only $1 billion. But y'all can remember the leader of the opposition at the time trying to give us the impression that we were in so much debt owed to these people. But no, she's she's basically double it, triple it. Because 1.1 multiplied by 3 is 3.3. So she actually tripled the foreign debt owed to the IMF, the World Bank, the CDB between 2018 and now. Tripled, right? So how can a country be the fastest growing economy and being crippled with debt from these institutions? And these institutions are the only foreign income that Barbados is earning. So in the next chart, the next one, I just want the people to soak in and to see the figures.
This
This
one?
chart, yes, this
Okay.
chart in particular speaks about what you call the current account deficit, or basically loss of foreign exchange. So foreign income minus foreign exchange loss. When you minus the two, you get a deficit or loss. And Barbados recorded a deficit of $447 million in 2018, which means that we had to go and borrow that amount in terms of foreign currency. The next year, we borrowed 293 million. But this is the size of the deficit again, foreign income minus foreign expenses. So what you're seeing here in 2020, when it came in at minus 556 million, that was the first impact of COVID, where we lost income from tourism. And the hole in tourism widened the foreign account deficit, the current account deficit, and placed Barbados into a deeper financial hole when we had to go back to the international markets to borrow additional money from the IMF, the IDB, the CDB, and those people. By the end of 2021, that hole got substantially worse. That we are now seeing deficits in our foreign exchange over $1 billion. As you can see at the top here, where we have $1.2 billion in debt. Debt increases. So this hole or this deficit has to be filled. The taxation coming from the international financial community is not that substantial to substantiate any contribution to this. We don't earn foreign income via exports, imports. The international business sector is under attack, so we are constantly losing income from that as well. So there's no way to earn foreign exchange, so that's why we have to go and borrow. So that's the reason for this big tear in what you call the current account, which shows that we are $1.2 billion down in a financial hole at the end of 2021. So by 2022, we're saying that we're still at $1 billion in deficit. Right? So which means, and this is only 2020, this is 2022. At the end of 2023, the figure is going to be another $1 billion. So for 3 consecutive years of $1 billion losses, you call that a recession. When you have 3 consecutive quarters of negative growth, you call that a recession. This is what you call a recession. This is what you call a debt trap right here, where you have substantial deficits. And the only way you can fill these deficits is by going and borrow money from the international community. To make things worse, we have to repay interest on all of the monies that is borrowed. So the interest payments right now are past $900 million a year, and that is going to be sold between now and 2037, and $827 million of this IMF money has to be repaid to them by 2027. Right? We can't cut state-owned enterprises fast enough to starve off or to plug that hole. We can't raise taxes fast enough to plug that hole. So you're seeing the challenge where the government is in a predicament because the main consumers of foreign exchange are oil and what the merchants buy. Right? Our prices keep going up. The merchants keep using the foreign exchange, spending it, and you're not earning anything from tourism. So I just want to read a quote here from Alternative Views at Chapter 6 on the international financial economy. And it says, in taking a look at the international financial economy of Barbados, the country is in the beginner stages of a trend in foreign exchange slides in Barbados. So it is advised that the government of Barbados will move early to avoid the Barbados economy sliding further to the point of devaluation of the Barbados dollar. So this aspect, which is called the current account, which deals with the foreign exchange of Barbados, this is what deals with the devaluation of the currency. When you cannot meet or close these deficits, then you have to devalue the dollar either internally or externally. What Barbados is doing, according to Kevin Greenwich, is to internally devalue the dollar. That's the reason for the IMF program, and that is the reason for cutting the NAS. That is the reason for cutting off the healthcare. That is the reason for education reform. That is the reason for privatizing water authority and privatizing all the other state-owned enterprises, because the government has to cut substantially from its books so that they could run what the IMF calls primary surplus and to close the fiscal deficit. And then on top of that, what you're seeing here, they have to close the current account deficit. So the fiscal deficit is also $1 billion. And the fiscal deficit is really what government spends, but what government makes, and interest payments. Right? So when you minus what government earns from what they're spending, minus the interest payments, that is what you call the fiscal deficit. As I told you earlier, interest payments are at 1 billion. The size of the deficit is at 1 billion. This is the fiscal, this is the internal side now, is at 1 billion. The external side, which is this what I'm showing you right here now, is also at a billion. And IMF and economic circles, you call this a classical case of the debt trap, where a government finds it hard to get out of the cycle of using the tax revenues they earn to pay down debt. Is then you gotta borrow debt to keep repaying debt. And that's why it could have been in the newspaper recently that we have to go and borrow an additional $1.6 billion next year to help fill the hole. And as you can see right here, I put it right there clearly. Foreign borrowing or foreign earnings is required to close this large hole. So that is where the government is borrowing another $1 billion to help close this hole right here. Okay. To continue on, the borrowing that they undertake, they use it to build up the foreign reserves. But despite having large reserves in a small open economy like Barbados, it has what you call a foreign exchange constraint, where you cannot earn enough or you cannot tax enough to close the holes in terms of the massive gaps of foreign exchange that you have to borrow. Always existed and it always will exist in Barbados because we have an affinity for the international community, and the strength of our currency allows us much better economic opportunities to shop in the world as opposed to using the C dollar or any other Caribbean currency. That's the benefit of having a strong Barbados dollar. But having the high reserves is important. But if you borrow the reserves in attempt to pay down foreign exchange bills, it does not cure the problem, but it makes it worse if not supported by a policy to cut this deficit, which is the same $1 billion deficit. You need to cut that and to stop the foreign exchange leaving the island, slow down the foreign exchange leaving the island, and to encourage more foreign exchange entering. No foreign exchange is entering Barbados, so we're going deeper and deeper in the hole as it comes to foreign income. And the main cause of that foreign exchange depletion is the widening gap between foreign exchange earnings and foreign exchange spending. As from in January 2021, Barbados earned $1.4 billion while spending $2 billion with fuel imports and imports from the merchants using at least $1.3 billion of these earnings. So Professor Justin Robinson wrote a letter to the Nation newspaper, and he said to them that on November 5th, 2021, Barbados is facing a $1 billion deficit. He said that the tourism industry's collapse and its subsequent slow rebound have left the government of Barbados with a near $1 billion financial problem, which an increased supply of foreign money is currently solving. And this was evident in the new central bank data, which shows that the $958 million current account deficit on the balance of payments at the end of September was also due to increased imports, especially for fuel. The Professor Robinson went on to say that, well, it is not unusual for Barbados to run a deficit. The current gap was wider than normal, and he attributed this to the big fall in inflows from tourism and travel. And he said that the slowdown in tourism is showing up in that balance of payments, and we have a deficit on the current account, but it has widened, and that's really record, and the really record low earnings from tourism really leading to a surge in the current account deficit and making it wider. Okay. So Justin Robinson proves the point that I was making, that the government's current account deficit is definitely problematic for it. And that's the reason why it has to keep going borrow all of this foreign money, because the level of cuts and the level of restrictions from the IMF program, they have to keep doing what the IMF says, but at the expense of the people. So they will never return and tell the merchants to slow down on using the foreign exchange. What the government would do would be to cut its own spending, which would actually cut fuel imports, and it would place other restrictions on foreign exchange. And that is the point that we're heading to, where the government now has to sparingly allow citizens to use the foreign exchange, because the tier in it is getting wider and wider. And this is 3 years now that we had a deficit that is over $1 billion, which means that we lost over a 3-year period $3 billion worth of foreign exchange. And that is seriously problematic. So while being under the IMF program, right, we can't do with the IMF what they did to the local investors, which is to go on a debt restructuring, just write off the money and say that we're not paying you back. If they choose to default on these IMF loans, that is the end of Barbados. Right? That is the end of Barbados. And we could pack a shop, because you've seen the countries, Trinidad, Guyana, Jamaica, Mexico, right? All of these countries that have strong currencies, when they run into situations where they cannot repay the IMF, all of them had to devalue their currencies. And with the slide that I showed you on the charts right here, you see how big the slide is. So what is the government doing to bring foreign exchange in Barbados to close this gap, to ensure that they don't have to keep going back to the IMF every year after year after year after year, to borrow $1 billion plus? Then we still have to turn around and make interest payments of $1 billion plus to the IMF straight at the 2037. So what money are we going to have internally to run the affairs of this country? With the IMF is already supporting domestic budgets, right? And what was alarming about this thing, I learned recently that the government of Barbados actually presented a report to the Congress of the United States, and that report was a monitor of all of the active loans from the IMF to the government of Barbados. And the Congress in there is saying that the United States of America actually provided supplementary funding to Barbados to actually build them out of the income crisis that they're in.
Wow.
But Barbados, having a good track record, repaid all of its IMF debts on time, and they are fully sure that Barbados stands ready to do whatever it has to do to ensure that the IMF is repaid in full and on time. And that's the dangerous statement to make. I don't want to speak too long, but I will hand over to you guys now.
No, well, that is, you said that they presented what to the U.S. Congress?
It is a report on the debt portfolio for Barbados and Suriname. It was submitted together, Barbados and Suriname, simultaneously, because Suriname is the second highest indebted country in the Caribbean. Right? So the report contained a monitor of Barbados's debt management strategy, Barbados's debt service strategy, and a couple of other information on Barbados's IMF program, because it actually spoke directly to Barbados's IMF loan portfolio. So it was concerned about Barbados's ability.
Sorry, lost you there, KEMAR. Concerned about Barbados' ability, and we lost you.
Right. It's
Okay, good.
concerned
You're
about
back.
Barbados's ability to repay the IMF on time and in full. It is concerned about the loss of income from COVID and the destruction of the tourism industry in Barbados. And it is also a concern about the international business sector, as it is one of the larger foreign exchange earners, and the new Biden tax plan, which would essentially impact foreign exchange earnings in the country. So they're basically trying to tell you from now that they don't have any doubts that Barbados will be able to repay, but they have concerns based off these factors that is going to impact Barbados' ability to pay. But because the government stands ready to do whatever they have to do domestically to raise the money, they don't have any fears. That is dangerous. So the government is saying to them that they would do anything, they would cut any ministry, they would cut institutions off the books, they would privatize whatever they have to privatize to ensure that the IMF gets back their money. That is basically what the document is saying.
Because what they have actually done is to cut welfare payments, so welfare recipients have been evicted. And that is a very dangerous thing, because a country will be successful if it takes care of the least vulnerable in society. The most vulnerable, in society. You must take care of the most vulnerable. The millionaires and the people out there with money, you don't need to have programs for them, but you need to take care of the most vulnerable. And when government has reached a stage where you are neglecting that group, that government should not exist. That government should leave office, because its prime primary role is to take care of those who can't take care of themselves. And you are sacrificing that because you want to look good to the Americans, you want to borrow more than you can. And also, and I'm glad you mentioned it, KEMAR, the merchants that are based in our foreign exchange. Go into the supermarkets in Barbados, any one of those big supermarkets, and you will see items that we spend foreign exchange for that is not necessary. I have seen coconut water in cans. I have seen, I'm talking about imported. I have seen plantains sliced and put in a pretty plastic bag, frozen. And I came home and I peeled the plantain and I took 15 seconds to do that process. So you're not saving anybody any time because you importing plantains and stuff. It's harder to open the bite than to cut the plantain. And a lot, I saw garlic, peeled garlic in containers that were imported into Barbados. Now, that is ridiculous. People who do that, they are more treasonous than us, Freddie. They're more into destroying this country than us, because people would import things totally unnecessary just to make the money. I've seen government give people licenses to bring in fruit and vegetables that were in supply in Barbados and were in abundance. I saw tomatoes when tomatoes were you were selling tomatoes for $1 a pound. Locally, merchants got permission to bring in tomatoes. So government must control. But because we are also a part of the World Trade Organization and we are not supposed under those regimes to restrict trade, we're going to let people come and dump any of their old garbage here, and we're going to take it. And government must look for exemptions, especially in small societies like this. You cannot afford to allow big countries, because some of these businesses in these big countries, their income is more than the revenue of Barbados. I talk about international companies. And when we are forced to import from them, even if we want it or not, because the merchants are selfish and greedy, and they want to destroy our local producers, because when the local producers make something, they're not giving it to the merchants. So the merchants are not making any money on it, and governments go ahead and allow them to import to the detriment of Barbados. Somebody needs to stop this government, you know. And let me be very clear. By all legal means necessary. Because I do not want to be among you, what they call people who treason. So
But
I am.
Well, let me ask you something though, KEMAR, because over the weekend, the Prime Minister made the point, and I'm pulling it up on the screen, that Barbados is the fifth fastest growing economy in the world.
That's a
Um,
lie.
how is it that Barbados, what you just described to us, how is it that that could be the case and Barbados be the fifth fastest growing economy in the world? I'm going to pull up another image that shows, let me see here, the top 5 growing economies in the world for 2023. I don't see Barbados there.
You have to look
Pastor
down.
Ferdinand, that is such a fallacy, right? That is such a fallacy, right? The government, what the government did, right, was to lie to the people of Barbados to start with, right? It came in and said that the debt to GDP in Barbados was at 175%, right? And they claim that they reduce. I'm about to explain the concept as to why the country couldn't grow. That's just lies. They reduced the debt to GDP from 175 to 114%, not by paying out any debt, but by a debt restructuring. Right? So the deficits that the last administration were running, those deficits were covered by the central bank, the national insurance scheme, treasury bills, and the financial system, banks and credit unions. What the government did was just to swipe off $4 billion of that investment. That is what brought down the debt to GDP target by the debt restructuring, not that the government paid back any debts locally. Right? What the government agreed to in exchange with the IMF was a 6.5% primary surplus, which basically said that the government needed to make $600 million more in revenues than they did previously. So the government would balance its books and make an additional $600 million more. So what the government did over the last 5 years, Pastor Ferdinand, was to put taxation in place. So you had the fuel tax, you had corporation tax, you had increases in VAT, you had increases on tourism, you had a whole host of taxes which equated to approximately $300 million worth of taxes that Mia Motley put in place when she came in the mini budget. Right? When COVID hit Barbados, the economy of Barbados tanked. I think it was between 18 to 21% that it went down. Right? The government is claiming that the Barbados economy grew, but there's something called nominal growth and real growth. If you did not recover back to the point that you were originally at before COVID, you did not grow. Right? The economy of Barbados is not at the point that it was at before COVID, and to make things worse, the Barbados economy declined for 8 consecutive quarters straight up to COVID. So it never grew even before COVID. So how could it be growing now when before COVID, when you had the income from tourism and you had much more access to finances and it wasn't growing then? How can it be growing now when we are under massive recession? The tourists not coming, the international business sector crumbling, we're not earning any foreign exchange but borrowing. Countries hardly lending us money but China. You don't have the income, but you're claiming that the economy is one of the fastest growing in the world when you don't have the income. But when you had it, the economy was declining for 8 consecutive periods.
You forgot Saudi Arabia.
So,
But
well, yeah, the Saudis, and God knows how much money we're able to take from them.
no, but could there?
You're saying something, Calvin?
Yeah, we are seeing a pattern in Barbados. The prime minister tells any lie with a straight face, and the people of Barbados sits down and says nothing about it. I'll give you a couple of examples to show you why we cannot trust her or why we cannot trust her government. This last one with the fifth growing, you grow when you can't, unless she's talking about borrowing money. But you can't grow on borrowed money. You can't be borrowing money to meet expenditure and then call it growth. That is the fact, because you got to pay back that money. 1, 2. And again, that issue is coming from the bottom, and she's saying, well, we are the fifth at the bottom and get mixed up. Because that is the only way our speech could be anywhere near the truth. Let's be coming from the bottom. Barbados is probably now one of the worst places in terms of prices to live. And that is because of the excess burden and taxes that the government has placed on us. I mean, you put these burdens, the merchants are not going to absorb those taxes. They're going to pass them on. And we have seen it in the supermarket. we are not the fastest growing. But she says that at a public forum and without any sort of shame. But there's a pattern to it. You remember some time back, and this is now about cricket. Now she wanted to be in on the thing. And she said, oh, that she went downstairs at school and in the basement and watched the World Cup, when the West Indies won the World Cup cricket. People then pointed out that that was a Saturday and she wasn't at school. You know, things like that in any Westminster type system of government that is matured would cause the removal of the minister that said that. But then again, even worse, again, in the Sunday's paper, which is stout, she claimed that she went to visit him and told him that they're going to name the amphitheater in the what they call it, the botanical gardens after him, and he was elated. The man was out cold, hadn't spoken to anybody because a friend of his, who is also a friend of mine, says that the man was sedated, wasn't communicating, and people from the press who knew that, hear her say that, did not challenge her on it. You know, when you tell, and the thing is, you're lying, you know, sometimes the fellow say, but if you lie to get out of trouble, you know, maybe. But she's in trouble, she's just a liar. And the people of Barbados refuse to see, but if a person is just a chronic liar, and their default position is lying, they will lie and then say, you know, something, I could tell the truth there, it wouldn't really matter. Her default position, she has to find a lie at every stage, and at every speech she's making, she finds something to say that isn't true. And Barbados, you cannot trust a liar. People say, as a little boy here, people saying they would trust a thief, but not a liar. Well, we have put our confidence in the hands of a liar. We put the trust.
I wanted to say something here to agree with you. When the question was asked to the Prime Minister by a reporter, Marlon Madden from Barbados today, if Barbados was intended to sign on to another IMF program to continue the pension reform that was not started in the last program, she denied it. She said no. Pension reform was included in the first IMF program, and there will be no pension reform whatsoever in the second IMF program. So on behold, pension reform, they make changes to the NAS, right? So Caswell is right, but somebody in the comments asked a question about the debt of Barbados being $18 billion. The national debt of Barbados was never $18 billion, and the Prime Minister needs to stop saying that, because that is not correct. Never, 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 never in the history of Barbados was the debt of this country that high. It is a lie. Right? I gotta prove what I'm saying. We should be concerned that the information coming out to the Central Bank of Barbados is not accurate, because I have the report here which shows the foreign debt, well, the national debt of Barbados going as high as 15 billion maximum. Right? I have the report from 2012 straight up to 2023. It's only the report from Kevin Greenwich that has something different compared to all the other reports from Cleverstone Haynes all the years. Right? The year that Mayor Motley is reporting that the debt was at high, it was never that high on the Cleverstone Haynes, and you can read all of the reports that have the proof. It is only this last report by Kevin Greenwich that they have this thing with the debt going that high, but that is not true. What they did was to artificially increase those debt figures and to artificially jack up the debt to GDP ratio, right? To go and tell the IMF, well, you know, we 100 and this amount of dollars in debt, and we can need more financing to do this, and we can need more financing that because the debt is that high. They started to include things in the legislation that were debts that really weren't debts. So all of the government guarantees all of the financial arrangements that government had that you did not consider debts before, under the new regime, they set it up that it could become debt, and that is what artificially jacked up the debt statistics in Barbados. And I know what I'm telling you because I studied public debt statistics at the IMF. I can tell you how it is done, right? So that is what the government did. So the debt restructuring that they talk about and bringing on the debt, even if so, they just completely swept it off with the stroke of a pen. And the only time that was ever done, kind of gonna wrap up on this point, the only time it's ever done where the government or any government in the world ever restructured is that system like how Barbados did was in Russia, Ukraine, and in Uruguay, right? And the government would not want to come forward and tell the truth, tell the people of this country that realistically they ran us into a drama with the IMF and they really don't know how to get out. So they will take any instruction to walk us further and further and further and further down the hole because they just don't know what to do because they know they messed up. We're going to swiping the credit card a little too much times. So that is the challenge that we are facing. And if you don't be careful, we'll be staring at the devaluation of the Barbados dollar very soon under this government too.
But you know, KEMAR, there are going to be those people who would argue that the dollar is being devalued for them because when you go into the supermarket, it certainly is not buying what it used to. And as far as I'm aware, I haven't seen any significant changes in the salaries and incomes of people. Um, you know, this is to me, this is one of the challenges of this show. We cover so much ground in the 3 hours that we have. And you know, I wish sometimes we had more time, and I believe even if we I believe even if we had more time, we would still have a whole lot of people staying on right through the entire segment. But I just want to draw all of our attention before we head off on the show tonight to the symposium that is up on the screen in front of you. It is this coming what's today? Today's Friday. It's next week, Friday, December the 8th and Saturday, December the 9th. This is going to be a symposium addressing issues on family, gender, and sexuality in Barbados and the Caribbean. It has a cadre of really great speakers: Corey Beckles, Dr. Vincent Gill, Davida Maynard Holligan, Philippa Davies. We have Glenn Stanton and Dr.
And Gillies.
Gillies, therapist and author from Canada. And we're certainly looking forward to a tremendous symposium with them. I see a workshop for the youth, parents, community, and church leaders, plus scenes from the NIFCA Disqualified Praise Academy Speak Night production. I believe that has been postponed until the beginning of the year in January, but it's going to be held at the First Baptist Church on Constitution Road. There's no charge for it, but you have to register in order to attend, and you can register at the marciaweeksshow.com. marciaweeksshow.com. And so we want to encourage you to register for this symposium. The Marcia Weeks Show is a part of this, and we look forward to a tremendous time. We want to thank you, KEMAR, for that. Wow, I mean that was an education there at the end of our night. I think a great way to end the night. We took a rundown through the entire aspect of the Samoa Agreement, the whole aspect of the sexuality agenda connected to trade. We went through all of that. We were happy to have the former Speaker of the House of St. Lucia. I forget her name now. Let me go back and make
Sarah
sure.
Flood BEAUBRUN.
Yeah, your what would you call her?
Hero.
Your hero. Really great to have her, and Maxine, as always. Maxine is such a wonderful educator in terms. And I tell you, I sit here. I do have to interrupt from time to time in order to tie things together and to keep us moving through the subjects that we want to try to cover. Um, and it's sometimes difficult to have to conclude an area that is going so well, but we do have time constraints, that we need to be moving into other areas in terms of the program for the night. But maybe one of these nights we can get an entire night dedicated to X, dedicated to Y, dedicated to Z. Don't know if that'll be able to happen. But gentlemen, before I go, any closing comments from you, Caswell? And right after you, KEMAR, any closing comments from yourself? And we will be out of here.
Well, I'm going to be short because we are quarter an hour over our limit. But all I want to say to the people of Barbados is to wake up. You know, you nobody has to tell you that this government is incompetent. Nobody has to tell you that the prime minister lies routinely, without any fear of a backlash for doing so. And the people should be, that means she has no respect for the people of this country, where she can go and lie routinely on a regular basis and just figure, well, oh, nothing will happen to me. I remember when I was a little boy and I was telling lies, I know I would have gotten some lashes. I didn't want to beat her, but we beat her with our votes. And that is what this country must do. We must remove people who we can't trust. And if you can say to me with a straight face that you still trust me, I'm only the Barbados that were party to run this country, well, something is wrong with you or me. And I think nothing is wrong with me. So it got to be wrong with you who think so. We need to rid ourselves of this albatross around the necks of the people of this country. They have shown their incompetence from day one. They have shown that they will promise you A and then do B, C, LGBTQ and do everything else other than what they're saying. Remember their manifesto. Look at the manifestos they've done two so far and see which one of those manifestos they've ever tried to keep. One of the first things they brought, and KEMAR can just bear me out here, because I mentioned it in the Senate when it was there when it first happened, when they said they can write off the debt. That's not what they promised us. Reprofiling and writing off are two different things. But within days of forming the government, Mayor Motley constituted herself as the entire government without the cabinet of Barbados and went and plunged this country into the worst crisis that we've ever been in financially. And nobody seems to want to believe that she's incompetent. And then she surrounds herself with a lot of people, and they might be competent in one or two areas, but they're not, and what they do, they give her advice. And it has to be conflicting advice because whatever she's following, it has not worked. Barbadians have to seriously consider if we are being well served by this government, led by Mayor Motley. Good night.
Thank you so very much, Caswell. KEMAR, any closing comments from you?
Yes, well, I just want to wrap up by saying that the financial situation in Barbados, when the government spoke about how good the economy is performing, or how those performance, even if it did perform, which it did not, came as a result of increased taxation on the people of Barbados and increases in international debt from the IMF, the IDB, the CDB, the European Union, which we have to repay in US dollars. No improvements in economic activity were regarded for any of this good performance they're speaking about. And if again around 2019, early 2020, Barbados economy did not grow one bit. It declined for 8 consecutive quarters straight up to COVID. Right? They put on in total approximately $600 million in taxes on the backs of Barbadians to meet this IMF surplus target. What they're not telling you is that the cost of government is still very high and that they have to go and borrow absurd amount of money to keep running the government to balance off these budgets in agreement with the IMF targets. We don't have the luxury of doing what they did with the local investors, which is to just write off the money. That's going to happen with the IMF. So we are facing a serious issue in this country where we are in what you call a debt trap or perpetual borrowing relationship, where we have to be constantly borrowing every year straight up to 2037 at amounts at over $1 billion to be able to fill the holes that are left for the government's inaction to get the foreign exchange earners up and running. So we have a lot of work to do, the opposition. So thank you, and to you, Pastor. For
Thank you
Freddie,
so much.
before you go, I want to correct something that you said. You said that salaries have not increased. Remember, you just said that a little while ago.
Yeah, not in keeping with the expenditures.
Let me correct you.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't heard about senior ministers? Their salaries better.
Oh dear me. Oh, dear me.
Significantly.
I don't know if they shop at the same supermarkets as the rest of us do. I have to behave myself. You all cause me to misbehave. There are a couple of things my mother taught me. One of the things is this: speak the truth and speak it ever, cost you what it will. He who does the wrong thing still. I've never forgotten that. And I remind you of that little statement I read a little earlier tonight, coming out of my favorite book. When the king is concerned with justice, the nation will be strong. But when he is only concerned with money, he will ruin his country. I think that is an accurate description as it relates to our country at the moment. So
and
we
our
want to
king
thank.
is ruining
Sorry.
our country.
Well, listen, guys. We want to thank both of you, and of course, we want to, even in their absence, we want to thank. Is it Dawn? Did I get it right, Caswell?
Sarah Flood Barber.
Sarah Flood Boburn. From St. Lucia, former Speaker of the House in St. Lucia, former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Of course, we want to thank our own Maxine McCLEAN, tremendous woman. I tell you, I've known her for many, many years, and she's really a great asset. And tonight was a real education as we looked at the Samoa agreement. We want to thank you. We know we are way over our time. And we thank you for being with us and staying with us, all 370 some of you that stayed with us up until this time. So until Sunday night, we don't want you to miss that, because KEMAR is going to be number one on that show with the young people. And I'll just be opening it up and hosting, but he's going to be running the show on Sunday evening, 7 o'clock, with a group of young people. And he'll be engaged in a number of different topics and subjects that it's going to be intriguing to hear their point of view and their view of things in our country. So until Sunday, we want to thank you for being here with us tonight. Thank you for staying right through up until this point in time. We appreciate your presence, and we look forward to you sharing, and being with us on Sunday night. So God bless, good night, and it has been a pleasure being your host of the show. Good night, Caswell, and good night, KEMAR. God bless you guys.
Good night.